deep end. Hell yeah.
Hello and welcome all to another exciting episode of Lorebeards. I will admit, in preparation for this one, I have been trying on many different hats. Hats of all sizes. Small hats, big hats, medium hats, and it's, by the end of it, fair to say that none of them were quite as impressive as anything that the good old Zharr, the good old Chaos Dwarfs have to offer.
No,
I'm looking forward to this one.
Compares.
Yeah, no hat compares.
If it's not at least about 50% of your actual height, then it's not even worth it.
Wait a minute. Let's get this Christmas tree.
Don't hurt your neck.
There we go. I am now officially a Chaos Dwarf with my giant Chaos Dwarf hat. Maybe put it behind me. See how that looks. Almost.
A little
no. Yeah, we're almost there. Okay, right. That's proper stupid. Let's put that behind me. Let's throw away the Chaos Dwarf tree. Okay, so today we're talking about the capital of the Chaos Dwarf Empire. Good old Mingol Zharr-Naggrund. Zharr-Naggrund. And it's going to be a fun one, I think, this week, because obviously there's quite a lot we can say about the city itself, some of its inhabitants, exactly how it became what it became. But I am super interested to see if we can manage to keep this one going for a full 2 and a bit hours. A little bit like, 3 hours really, a little bit like when we started with Dragon Ogres. I thought, is there going to be enough to talk about this? And boy, was there with the Dragon Ogres. So I'm super excited to see where this goes. Let's start with Jonathan. Hey, Jonathan, thanks very much for dropping us a little super chat there. Excited.
Second short episode.
Yeah, let's see how this one goes. And Hammond, why couldn't the dwarf properly? I don't even want to finish reading.
Oh man, I actually like this one a lot. Why couldn't the dwarf properly clean up the spill? He only had one rag.
One
rag. Hey, he used Coslet in a pun. I'm proud of him.
I'm pretty impressed with that one. Largely because whenever one does a proper Lorebeardy pun, it deserves a proper cheers. Well done. Okay, so I was just about to start there, but Roderick, hey Roderick, good to see you out there. Extremely problematic for you to be talking about the Zharr without engaging with their big hat traditions. I think I did indeed already discuss their big hattedness and put a tree in my head to try and represent such things.
Listen, we don't want to insult them by our hats not being big enough, so we're just gonna err on the side of caution.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also going to offer a word of warning. Now, I'll admit a lot of you are going to probably start watching this after we've started streaming, but nevertheless, I do feel that it is worth putting a quick content warning up, because the good old Zharr enslave pretty much fucking everything, which is a sensitive topic for some people, but we are going to be discussing slavery at some length. And not only that, we're also going to be discussing pretty much using sorcery science to fuck about with everything and demons and all sorts of horror. So if you're out there at the moment feeling a little bit sensitive about such things, might I recommend that you go watch another stream, because seriously, we're going to be diving deep into just how nasty folks can be. And here comes a bit quick Cheshire grin. The Infernal Guard are seated in Black Fortress. What kind of war cults might be tucked away in Zharr-Naggrund or even Uzkulak? We'll get onto that as we go, because there's going to be quite a lot of discussions regarding exactly what is where, how big the empire is, what sits at the very center of it, who's leading it, who's not leading it, all of that gubbins. So keep on that one. And if you think that we've not answered this, do come back to us, Cheshire. Thank you very much, though, for the...
Don't worry, we will touch on that.
Yeah, we are going to be diving into that. So do you have anything you want to open with this week?
Yeah, sure. I'll open with a little thing. Just kind of setting the stage for where we're going. So for those of you that maybe not be super familiar with the Chaos Dwarfs, which can't be a ton of you because they obliterated the poll this week, as they obliterate all things. But from the perspective of the old world, a lot of people think there's not much out east, that there's just a barren wasteland, you wander, and then, hey, you're in Cathay. But in reality, there is actually quite a bit going on in that big empty space that a lot of people don't think about, which is that you go over the World's Edge Mountains, and as you go east, past the Wolflands with all the roving goblin tribes, past the Ashen Wastes, where there's not much but monsters and horrible creatures lurking beneath and above, and all sorts of other nonsense, past the roving.
Oh, Mandatus!
Oh, Mandatus!
Thank you so much. All hail, glorious Hashut! All hail the majesty of Mingol Zharr-Naggrund! All shall be brought under the fires of tyranny, in chains to the forge fires. Stoke the sacrificial furnaces for the offerings and demon engines, and praise mighty Hashut. Damn fucking straight. Yeah,
thank
you very much, Mandatus.
And doing that like every week. Thank you very much.
You rock.
I really appreciate it. So you carry on past the Ash Waste. You get past the Blasted Waste. You get past like the Desolation of Drakkenmoor. You get past all these other horrible things that just look like ash, and more ash, pretty much. And eventually you will arrive at the plains of Zharr-Naggrund, which are not a great place, because when you arrive there, you will basically see all of the refuse of industry of the worst kind. There is no environmental protection agency out here. It is just the absolute
them out in the harbor. Oh man. Just carry on.
Yeah.
Busy laughing at Hammond's comment going, holy shit. Also, thank you, Vinius, as well, for the lovely little super chat there.
Yeah. So, when you arrive in the plains of Zharr-Naggrund, you go down and down and down because you start sinking into a crater before you finally arrive just through all of the clouds of ash and toxic fumes and roaring fires and open air mines and all the other nightmares you can imagine. There stands the mighty mountain made of obsidian, which is a really weird material to build a city out of, but we'll get into that.
Particularly if you've got sorcery, a science going on, but we are going to dive into that.
We're going to get into that. And this mountain is, of course, not a true mountain, but was built, and it is the mighty city ziggurat of Mingol Zharr-Naggrund, which is a pretty nightmarish fucking place.
It really freaking is. Also, quick thanks there to you there, Laughing God. That was our sorcery science. Do you want a Grimgore? Because that is how we get a Grimgore. Yeah, we're going to be diving into that and the timeline of Black Orcs in general and where they almost certainly came from.
Yep. So I think for the purpose of this episode, at least right at the beginning, I think it's going to be better to kind of very much fast forward through what the Chaos Dwarfs are to just get to the kind of the point of it, so we can actually talk about the city itself, which is supposed to be kind of the focus. Because we could, if we were to talk about Uzkalak, we could be there a really long time, and we might swing back around to it if we still have time at the end. But bar to say that long time ago, some dwarfs went into Zar-Uzkul, which is the plain of skulls. And it's a place where the thing that's very interesting about the Darklands is that for most races, there is not a lot of great easy interest in the Darklands. They show up, they look around, they go, wow, this looks like a hell-blasted landscape that really sucks. Nothing seems to grow here. And there's always, like, the sun almost never comes out, and there's a lot of big, nasty cities here. This is terrible. Let's leave. But the dwarfs look around and go, wow, look at all these minerals. Look at all these volcanic deposits where all this like really nice gold and gems are constantly easy to find. And when we dig down deep, the soil is super rich with all the things we could ever want. There's tons of oil here and all the resources you could ever want for industry and wealth.
Hey, Matthew, just to quickly cut in while he's discussing the awfulness that is Zar-Naggrund and where it's sited, which city would you say is worse, Hellpit or Zar-Naggrund? And I think the answer is most definitely yes.
Yeah, it kind of depends what your personal ick is, in my opinion. I mean, they both have horrible slavery economies. They're both awful. One's built up, one's built down. But other than that, one's more into like industry hellscape, while the other's more into like fleshy nightmare hellscape. So it just kind of depends on what you're more awful-lated by. I don't actually think there's a good answer for that. They're both awful. Oh gosh, we got two new ones. Could we Roderick?
That's a really fun one. Let's do that one at the end. Because yes, you're right. It definitely wouldn't be the same as your regular dwarves.
Yeah, we could tackle that right at the end. What would be the toughest metal in the Warhammer world? Is it Gromrol? It is most of the time. It is Gromrol.
Yeah, most of the time it's Star Metal Gromrol. Meteoric Iron is also dropped sometime as a separate thing to Gromrol, even though both of them are referred to as Star Metal. You also have Ithelmar as well that the High Elves use, which is generally considered to be light and strong rather than bloody heavy and impregnable.
Strong and strong.
Yeah, exactly. Strong and strong. But generally speaking, Gromrol is right up there. Again, it depends on your personal lick.
Yeah.
Some people just don't like elves. Fuck those guys. Nice one, Inquisitor Thomas.
Anyway, dwarves came to Zornu's School. Things where a lot of the dwarves went, this place has bad juju, we're leaving. But some stayed because they were particularly greedy, or they cared more about results and less about risk. And it ended up, the chaos happens, they get surrounded, even though there's some weird timeline shenanigans, but we're not going to wax lyrical about that today. It's not slave economy, it's a labor economy. Yeah, sure. But eventually, the dwarves are isolated in the city that they built called Uskalak, and they stay there for a really super long time, and they dig deep, and they dig deep, and they dig deep, because there's nowhere else they can go. They feel abandoned by their gods, and deep in the darkness, they find something, or someone, depending on how you feel about it. And a pact is formed with the Father of Darkness, also known as Hashut, the god of fire, tyranny, and greed. And what emerges from Uskalak hundreds of years later is what we now know as the Chaos Dwarfs, which are dwarves that have been warped and mutated by the will of Hashut, and they have the ability to wield magic, which is a pretty alarming change if you know anything about dwarfs.
So we've got quite a lot to potentially unpack here, but I think unpacking it later is better, because we're going to be discussing some of the things that are inside the good old huge city that the Chaos Dwarfs have as their capital. But I do think there's a few things worth mentioning, at least, and that's that we have a couple of conflicting timelines going on here in terms of when this material is dropped down originally and the dates that they used originally. So if we consider the very first iteration of what we now know as Chaos Dwarfs, not the original Chaos Dwarfs from Warhammer Fantasy Battle 3rd edition, which were just normal dwarves but mutated by chaos with a whole bunch of special war machines, some of which were properly stupid. They're just daft.
You didn't like the ass cannon?
But I had them all in my armies because they were great. But regardless to that, the White Dwarf did a bunch of articles about adding Chaos Dwarfs for 5th edition of the game. That was effectively still also usable for 4th edition as well. Let's just bring that up there from Hammond. So they Hashut out. Seriously, Hammond. But yes, they did. So 5th edition of the game had a bunch of White Dwarf articles written that included a whole bunch of new styled Chaos Dwarfs with enormous hats, loads of gorgeous art put together by Mark Gibbons, and also John Blanche. And it's fair to say they completely changed not just Chaos Dwarfs, but the entire story around them, grounding them into the big world map that they had also released with White Dwarf over on the other side of the World's Edge Mountains, and giving them a home pretty much for the first time ever, which was centered around their capital, Zharr-Naggrund. And all manner of new details were added during this time, but they also added a little bit of a timeline. And the timeline says that effectively it happened during the Great Cataclysm. So the dwarves went up through the World's Edge, and some of them went burrowing off towards the east, deep into the east, chasing all of the mineral wealth that could be found over there, hiking their way across the plains, finding themselves over by the mountains of Morn as we know them today, and settling in there. And then the Great Cataclysm comes, and they're completely isolated. And we all know what happens up north, for those of you who have watched our Be'lakor video. Be'lakor becomes effectively a god up there. Oh, Michael Thomas says, been looking forward to this one. Me too. Thank you very much. Deeply appreciated. And up in the north, our first demon princes arise, our first gods that aren't one of the great 4 chaos powers, or any of the elven gods, or any of the other potential gods that will be added later into Warhammer lore down in, say, Ind, for example, or any of the gods that might be kicking around about Nehekara or whatever. So we've got ourselves our first true arrival of new gods coming into the world, with Be'lakor being the perfect example of that. It would make sense that somewhere in amongst all of this hellish landscapes that are being created up near the gates, that Hashut is also born during this period. He is given different titles and different levels of power in different books. Sometimes he's very clearly marked as a minor chaos god, which used to be a joke amongst my friends, because Chaos Dwarves, a minor chaos god. Is he the Chaos God of mining by any chance?
I didn't realize you were friends with Hammond back then.
I shall twist my mustaches in glee. Yeah, stupid joke. But nevertheless, he was often pitched as a minor Chaos God, and that's because at that point, Warhammer had changed, where previously the Realm of Chaos books had made it clear that there was loads of potential Chaos Gods and greater demons and weirdness going on over in the Realm of Chaos. But with later lore, it was the four great powers of chaos, and all the rest of it just wasn't. Or it was. Or it wasn't, depending on which book you read. And Hashut did not fit into that model. So Hashut gets lowered and raised according to the book that you read. But generally speaking, he is always presented as this great burning god of hatred and tyranny and fire and ash. A truly awful creature who is all about control. And also, because of the Chaos Dwarf nature as well, all about construction. Although they don't often talk about that aspect of him, but the great demon engines that are created in his name and the great bindings that are done for demons into machines and similar is all done in his great holy path, so to speak. So Hashut has got a definite character. He's a great demon god of some sort, whether he is the equivalent of an enormous demon prince or an actual god, like, say, the Horned Rat.
A mess. That's what he is.
Yeah, possibly. It's all down to your own preference, really, because the books bounce up and down a little bit on it. But apparently it's during the Great Cataclysm, which is ages ago. We're talking thousands of years. But according to the timeline, they knock it as back just 4,000 years before the time of Sigmar, which is not far enough back. Yeah. And it's an interesting conflict there.
Yeah, there is a quick, someone make a meme of Sotek with an unhinged conspiracy theory board to explain how Hash is really just Be'lakor, because everything is Be'lakor. There needs to be I would very much like a meme where you have two conspiracy theorists arguing, with one saying every god is Ladriel and the other one saying every god is Be'lakor, and them just like stabbing each other over it. But yeah, there is a major issue because it seems like they kind of took the original timeline that was produced back in 5th edition when the broader timeline was different, but they just copy pasted it in the later edition, so it doesn't make sense anymore. Where if you're dealing with the Cataclysm, you need to be back more like 5,600 years, not 4,000 years, because by 4,000 years, the Cataclysm was already over. Like the vortex was already formed, the demons were already banished. However, I do kind of love the idea that Hashut happened after the vortex, because it really introduces the concept that he's very, very weird, especially if you run with the idea that he was genuinely down somewhere deep in the darkness of the world and the Chaos Dwarfs stumbled across him. Because then you have to ask yourself, well, what the hell is that? Like, how is he down there? What is he doing down there? Which, you know, I've done the Chaos Dwarf Q&A where we did a lot of theory crafting about. There's a lot of potential ideas as far as he could still be a demon or a demon god or a demon prince, but maybe one that escaped into the depths of the earth where magic technically is stronger, and he's been kind of leeching off the natural magic of the world to keep himself physical until the Chaos Dwarfs stumble across him. Or you could even run with the idea that he's just something other, that there's other things in the deep dark, which is a very well-established trope that's stolen straight from Tolkien's universe and many other universes, where if you go down into the deepest, darkest pits of the earth, you're going to find things that you don't want to find. Like you don't want to go down there. Even if it's not a demon, though in Warhammer, we have notes that there are demons that can be found in the deepest, darkest pits of the world that by all rights shouldn't be there, but they are. And Hashut kind of is in that vague category.
Yeah, I agree. Broadly speaking, we've got ourselves something of divine capability. This is a god that can provide not just miracles and magic and all the rest of it, but someone that is capable of steering an entire species. Is this classic, it requires faith for it to manifest, the dwarves needed it so it was their thing? I highly doubt it. That's bullshit. The demon literally intervened. This demon god saved and mutated these Chaos Dwarfs. And I think it is worth just stopping here because these are going to be the founders of Zharr-Naggrund. So it is worth just briefly taking a moment to consider how bad it must have been. Yes, we might have some dwarves here who have separated themselves from the rest of the world because they are now over on, let's say, they're not connected to the world's edge and all the rest of the holds.
Mm-hmm.
They're no longer connected to their ancestor gods. Apparently, they are calling out and they're receiving nothing in return. There is chaos coming in all sides. They are going to die. Every last one of them. A good dwarf would just die.
Yep.
But they don't. And that, I think, speaks to not just the Chaos Dwarves that were out there, as in the Chaos Dwarves to be, and their tone, as in these were clans who were clearly far more expeditionary. They're moving out. They're more forward-thinking. They are perhaps less tied to their tradition. They're doing things like hiking across plains to get over to the extra wealth. They're greedy. They're greedier. They're going off to other places because they're greedy. So perhaps you've got that as a tone. But I think it doesn't so much speak to the tone of the dwarves. It speaks to the tone of Hashut. And before I get onto that, Hammond is saying something.
Is there a reason why there could be demon/minor gods deep down below? Because the Maw is in the core, therefore he provides them enough chaos magic. Well, this is way before the Maw.
This is way before the Maw comes up, but good question, Hammond. Yeah. And the Maw is burrowing down and absorbing magics down there too.
Yeah, the best thing to say is keep in mind that like the Great Warding or the geomantic web of the Slann, that's in the deep earth. Like it's collecting the magic that is naturally caused by the planet itself. We don't have any explanations for how that work. I always kind of, in my head, I always kind of use like the good old Full Metal Alchemist universe explanation where it's literally the energy of the tectonic plates rubbing, like the energy they release is able to be utilized by wizards in the Warhammer verse. And in that case, that's kind of what it is. It's just a form of energy.
So beyond that, CB4N, Hashut whispered to these dwarves who were in absolute peril. They're surrounded by demons. They're surrounded by mutants. The world is going to end for them. But these greedy dwarves chose to survive and chose to answer to Hashut's whispers, which means Hashut knew what to say. Which means Hashut is not like other demons. Dwarves rarely fall to the depredations of the ruinous powers. The reason being, they're so bloody fucking stubborn. They just don't do it. It's just not their deal. It's not how dwarves work. They don't have the same needs and wants and desires of humanity, for example, who are known for falling. But Hashut said something to these dwarves that made the dwarves go, you know what? Yes. Yes. I'm going to do this. We are going to do this. And they must all have agreed. It wouldn't have been one or two and all the rest of them just mutate because there'd been a big scrap. If it had just been one or two of them, they'd have been killed. If it had just been a king that had decided to do something or a queen that decided to do something, the clans would have rebelled because it's deeply undwarf. This is not the thing you're supposed to do. But they did. And that is an enormous story because it speaks to Hashut. Hashut may be the god of tyranny, may be the god of control and fire and brimstone and artifice, but he's also something that is intrinsically dwarfy. He is intrinsically tied in character to these dwarfs, and these dwarfs look to him and go, yes. Now, exactly how that manifests is never really explored in any real depth, other than they decided to do it. Yay! We'll go over in that direction. But I think if you're looking to, for example, give Hashut a character, think first to the dwarves themselves and how dwarves could manifest really, really bad. How their stubbornness is often coming before a fall. How their need to be ruled and rule, as in forming the proper traditional rules, can break down and cause pain. And that is, I think, beginning to understand the concepts of who Hashut is, but also look at what the Chaos Dwarves then do. They build and build and build, but don't build outside of what they need. because they have all the natural resources that they require, as we're about to move into, and they do not expand their empire very far. But as we're about to discover, their city is arguably the biggest city in the world. It's given numbers in more than one place, and it's often given numbers of Chaos Dwarves of over 1 million, just the Chaos Dwarves. And that's not their slave population. That's the Chaos Dwarves. Now, they don't have many sorcerers, only a few hundred, but there are potentially millions of dwarves there, which means they outnumber probably most of the dwarven holds. They've got an empire, and they're sat there, sitting behind their walls, doing whatever they need to do. It does suggest that there's a purpose here, because dwarves don't just squat. They're doing something because they need their resources. They're building, and we know one of the things they're building: this enormous, massive obsidian. Obsidian what? We're going to go on to exactly what it all is in a moment, but I think there is one question before we dive deep into all that for us to consider as we discuss the other parts, and that is obsidian's anti-magical, which means that this is the biggest, giant, enormous demon trap you've ever seen. Yeah.
So, Song of Power, the answer is yes. There's huge connections between them. Something we'll discuss a little bit in a bit. Hashut is such a brutal example of like the potential of actually that it's frightening, in that when you really look at like concepts of hatred and tyranny and greed, these very inflamed emotions, Chaos Dwarfs are very emotional compared to regular dwarfs. And he's fanning these flames. He's fanning all of the most like aggressive, expansionist, consumerish aspects about the dwarfs, which is very Axian. And very also much. He is a god that manipulates the fires of the earth, unlike anything else. Like there is virtually no other entity that can manipulate like the deep fires of the world like Hashut can, which is weird. It's really weird, and we'll get into that in a bit.
And it really does speak to a different character, different part of Hashut's character, that whole down in the earth, the magma bubbling up, because it really does speak to him. Do you want to take on this one first?
Yeah, Roderick. Would a regular Dawi that learns sorcery from Demonic Pact also slowly turn to stone? Yes. Like if a dwarf is using any form of magic that is dangerous and can result in them turning to stone. Even like a runesmith could theoretically, if they fuck up, they will turn to stone.
Yeah, we'll discuss this a little bit because there's a whole bunch of stony
there's a whole already part of Zharr-Naggrund that is
indeed, and we'll dive into it there. But just in a general comment, dwarves and magic do not mix, and their etheric flows work very differently to the other species. And when magic flows through them, it causes change to their flesh as their flesh resists it until eventually everything shuts down. But it's not a short thing. This is something that takes centuries. It takes a very long time.
Yeah, unless you really screw up or you get really unlucky, which is kind of hilarious. But
And
Datis, this is why the Dawi are as dwarfs but turned are my favorite of the Warhammer Fantasy races. You cannot separate the Dawi from Hashut. Yes, and we'll get into Hashut and his whole focus on like he's so tyrannical that he forcefully manipulates genetics, which is bonkers in a very sci-fi concept, but Warhammer Fantasy is much more of a sci-fi setting than a lot of people realize. It's got a lot
really is
in it.
Yeah, and we're about to dive deep into it as we head towards an industrial revolution.
Yeah, and then
another one
from Matthew Griffin. Do Chaos Dwarf form grudges? Yes.
Thanks, Matthew.
They are Chaos Dwarfs have held on to a lot of their dwarven cultural things. Not everything, but they've held on to a lot of them, and grudges are one of them. We don't have any indication that they have like a book necessarily, but I wouldn't be shocked if they did. But they do keep grudges big time.
I imagine they've got big, huge cuneiform pillars, because that would very much match their character to the T. Big pillars.
Hashut inflames these types of emotions of the Chaos Dwarfs. Does that mean he chose them over anyone else for a particular reason? Could be.
I would argue definitely yes. Hashut almost certainly was fanning the flames of their hatreds, of their needs and their greeds for a long time before they eventually fell. So long before they were besieged, I imagine Hashut was down there slowly but surely changing these dwarves over the course of probably centuries, because they do something super undwarfy, which means that you need to have yourself a certain amount of build-up before that immediately snaps.
Yeah, and the other thing we'll kind of get into with Hashut is the thing Hashut desires are not really possible by other races. I think Hashut singled out the dwarves for very particular reasons, because he could have gone after countless chaos tribes that were in the area, many of which, like, there's a lot of good lineup in the timeline that the Tong, who were like the scariest fucking chaos tribe to ever exist, like, they're mythical, they're so scary. They likely surrounded and were responsible for Uzkalak's kind of isolation, if you go by that version of the timeline, which he could have gone to them. They were like one of the most powerful tribes ever, but they weren't good enough. He wanted the dwarves.
Hey, Thomas, I actually love this question because it's you can almost say the opposite as well. Which is more fantasy or 40k? Because holy crap, it's difficult to make a call sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of people get too caught up in like the most basics of the battle games, like the weapons units are using and stuff like that, that they kind of miss the forest for the trees. And they don't realize how like bonkers, hilarious sci-fi, because like we get more information about the old ones in fantasy than we do in 40k, which is really funny.
So I think this is an interesting one, Jonathan. Do the Chaos Dwarves honor their ancestors from before Hashut? And the answer is, by all evidence, no.
Ooh, if anything,
what they do is they do respect age, but you've got to realize that that comes hand in hand with them living long enough to have that tyrannical power that they almost certainly would have gathered to their side. Chaos Dwarves and age still have that same honor system going on the rest of the dwarves have, but there's no real evidence at all that they have deep ancestor worship. It's been entirely replaced by Hashut.
Yep, and it's worth noting that the Chaos Dwarves have a huge focus on the concept that weakness of any form is to be like crushed and to be looked down upon, and they find it like repulsive. So like they only respect you as you get older, so long as you're getting more powerful. That's something that Astrogoth Ironhand is extremely worried about, and is why he's gone through so much effort to make himself continuously more powerful, because he started to get weaker because he's so old. His magic isn't as strong as it used to be, and the other Chaos Dwarfs are starting to notice. And that's a concern of his.
Okay, so we need to move towards the founding of our city.
No, we got one more, and then
hey, Holy Heartist,
is the Hat of Grudges. It gets bigger the more grudges.
Well, I did suggest a pillar.
Yeah,
we're over the hat judges.
Yeah,
so I'll drop in my little bit first. The Chaos Dwarves that eventually leave from their underground passages, presumably after the Cataclysm, presumably somewhere around 4,000 years before the time of Sigmar. Hey, Heron, could Hashut also be a renegade ancestor god? Yes, definitely. One that's perhaps fallen to chaos completely and has taken and become a demon prince, which is why potentially that it's so dwarfy in nature. There is a strong argument that that could be the case when one of the holds fell in the World's Edge Mountains. Carrick Flag, was it Flag? Whichever one it was.
Yeah.
The main hold fell, and there could have been an ancestor there, and it wasn't so much that Hashut whispered to them, it's what Hashut led them elsewhere. And there's a lovely argument on that one, but it is nothing more than theory hammer, not fact hammer. This isn't something that's actually laid in the background. In the background, he's very much a demon chaos god.
Yeah, because I mean, in the old lore, there was Skavor, who is kind of a renegade ancestor god, though it's like the dwarves are like, oh, he created the Skaven. Like, that's how weird the evil ancestor god could be.
Yeah, and I think that if you were looking to completely characterize Hashut and make sense of him, making him an ancestor god who had fallen to chaos would be one path that would be both unexpected by the vast majority of people out there, but matches up exactly with all of his traits completely. So it is a route that you could take.
All right.
Hey, Doom Rider.
If there's any more super chats after this, we will get to them, but we're going to talk for a bit. And then
we are.
Because y'all are being very generous. We appreciate it.
You all rock. Please just keep on throwing them at us.
Yeah, we will get to them. Could Hashut have been feeding off the dwarfen daddy mommy issues of being abandoned by the ancestors? Absolutely. Yeah. He could have been fanning those flames of,
in fact,
who knows? He could have even been
definitely
responsible for the reason the ancestor gods couldn't reach them, and then was fanning that and moved into the gap that he caused. That's a possibility.
Totally.
Be'lakor
So anyway,
definitely has done that.
the Chaos Dwarves that come out blinking into the sunshine are not the dwarves that went down. Hashut and the deal that they make with Hashut, and it is a deal. This isn't something that is ephemeral and will sort of worship you now.
Bargain.
There is an explicit bargain, and that bargain brings enormous change. Enormous change. The dwarves that are down there stop being dwarves. Now, how long they're down there for, if you want to make sense of all of the timelines, probably from the Cataclysm up to when the timeline starts for the Chaos Dwarfs, because that would sort of make sense, because that gives you the thousands of years necessary to wrought change upon dwarves. Dwarves, by their very nature, are exceedingly resistant to chaos, exceedingly resistant to magic. They just do not get on with that stuff at all, as we all know from the main dwarfs, who use runes to just be able to channel the magic and make it do stuff. They make magic work rather than actually channeling it, doing it themselves. So change is wrought upon these Chaos Dwarves, and in terms of your base Chaos Dwarf, they come out much more ashen of skin, tusked, red eyes, often a bit more hunched, and potentially open to mutation, because dwarves don't mutate very much at all. Chaos Dwarves almost certainly mutate a bit more, but even then, there isn't that many mutant Chaos Dwarves. It's not like their ranks are full of tentacles and extra arms and 17 heads. The Chaos Dwarves are still pretty much representative of their species. They themselves have changed and they've become more like Hashut. That's the first one. And our second major change for our Chaos Dwarves are the Bull Centaurs, who in many respects come to represent and guard everything that is Hashut. The Bull Centaurs are a mixture of bull and dwarf, as ridiculous as that sounds. But it is absolutely the case, because the concept of the bull is central to Hashut. That stubborn animal, the bull that's bullish, so to speak. Big, red, burning bulls. Now, obviously, we have real-world reasons for that, why that's the case, because they're drawing upon ancient legends from the Middle East, and a whole bunch of those get all conflated together, mashed up, and then just turned into Chaos Dwarfs. Whether it's Persian history or whether it's a whole variety of other golden idols that are all bullish. They are, in many respects, the source material for this, and the ziggurats that they build as well. But that's by the by, because it's not the real world, it's the Warhammer world. And these two completely new species come out. Chaos Dwarves are basically two species. Your Chaos Dwarf and your Bull Centaur. They're not the same. They are different. And they come out, and if you would imagine approximately 6,000 years ago, this small group moving out into a hellscape filled with greenskins, ogres over there, hobgoblins up to the north, all manner of monsters. Your first thought would be, they're possibly in trouble because there can't be that many of them. It's just a single Holdsworth that have been slowly but surely changing over the course of centuries, and they can eventually come blinking to the sunlight. Wrong. They are martial, they are organized, they're prepared, and they are ready to not just fight, but to conquer. And their first job is empire building. And their first part of that empire building is sighting themselves over at, we finally got there, Mingal Zharr-Naggrund, which becomes the center of much of their civilization to come.
Yeah, and what's interesting is it was a long journey. The distance between Uzkalak and Mingal Zharr-Naggrund is hundreds of miles. Like, it is a long fucking trip, and it's not. And to express how difficult it is, you're also going from Zornu's Cool, which is a plateau. It is really, really high up. It's exceedingly high altitude, and they had to not only cross hundreds of miles, but also find a place where they could navigate down from Zornu's Cool to the actual plain of Zarduk, which is like the main area. And then from there, they wandered back until they found the river, and they followed the river down and down into a crater. and they went into this crater, which is the actual plain of Zarduk. Past that is the rest of the Darklands. But you go to the plain of Zarduk, which is a crater, and then within that crater, there's another crater. At the very, very deep, dark part of it, at the deepest pit, is where they founded Zharr-Naggrund, where the River Ruin, as it's now known, crossed into this crater, and it reached this kind of bottom point, which to me suggests there was something there. Like, there's a very specific reason they went to that spot before they started to build.
So it's not the first time this has happened, where we've got ourselves a group of people moving to a place because of a god. This happens later with the Kislevites. So don't think this is a unique occurrence. Indeed, I would go further and say that perhaps the other story is worth looking at. I'm almost certainly we'll do that with a later stream, so that we can see that perhaps there's a certain amount of bridging going on, because it's, again, in the far north, potentially a super powerful entity. In one case, one born of ice, and in this case, one born of fire. Incredibly powerful entity, a holdout from the cataclysm, probably a great demon prince, probably a demon god, or some other version of it. And it seems likely that the Chaos Dwarves were going somewhere because they were effectively summoned. It does feel very likely that, regardless of the fact that this place is redolent with all kinds of extremely important minerals that they can use to create everything they're about to start creating, that almost seems beside the point, given that we are in the center of a huge fuck-off crater that's called, quite literally, the Plain of Fire, because of all the lava that's already twisting through here, all of the volcanic activity in this area. It's not a friendly place to call home. But they chose to go down into this, to make this their home, the heart of the industry that they're about to begin, to found their city down here, and make sure it's super clear in your mind, to found and centralize their religion as well.
Just chuckling at that. Not going to stay on it, I'm just chuckling at it.
That's quite a good one. Because this is where the cult of Hashut, for want of a better description, where the great worship of Hashut becomes centered, and what they build is extraordinary.
Yeah, and what's interesting is so supposedly the founding of Zharr-Naggrund is somewhere like 2700-ish years before Sigmar. And what's interesting about the way that the city is raised is it's not just through construction. In fact, sorcery is very heavily implied to have been the first big thing they did, that the very earliest sorcerer prophets were said to have literally raised Zharr-Naggrund from the earth using nothing but magic, which is bizarre, especially because, once again, and I think it's worth taking a little detour on this, it's made of fucking obsidian. So obsidian, yeah, for those who don't know, obsidian, of course, exists in our world, though it doesn't have the same properties, but obsidian is volcanic glass. It's very fucking hard to work with material. It's extremely sharp. It's like one of the sharpest materials on Earth.
And it shatters.
Yeah,
it shatters like material to build with.
Yeah. And yet that's what they choose to make it out of, which is further weird because it's very resistant to magic. It is the anti-magic material, to the point that if you're going to take on a wizard, if you could shoot them with like an obsidian arrow or something like that, that wizard is fucked. They're not going to have a good time.
Yep.
And
okay, so let's just contextualize this just to make sure we are super clear. That's a tiny arrowhead, and Sotek's spot on. You get yourself an obsidian arrowhead into you as a wizard, your magic stops working. You get yourself an obsidian blade plunged into you, or an obsidian blade touching other artifacts. It tends to disrupt the magic working them. It stops magic artifacts working. Some people have purposely built, Malekith had purposely got himself an obsidian blade to stop other artifacts from working, to provide him with the advantage that he has for thousands of years worth of training with a fucking sword, which means, hey, look at all my magic. Oh, fuck. As he just goes, hey, thousands of years worth of training, carve. Elves can do that shit. They have built their entire fucking city out of this stuff. Small amounts of it is enough to completely entirely stop magic. And they've done this for clearly a reason. And their sorcerer scientists have found a way to get around it. And I think the second half of that combo is something we must always remember. The good old prophet sorcerers, or whichever particular term you want to go for, are not just sorcerers. They're sorcerer scientists. They are extremely intelligent, and they approach their magic in more ways than just one. For them, there's a lot more science going on through it. They're not just immaterial, using the realm of chaos or the aether, if you're an elf, depending on your preferred term. They are using the science of the material realm as well. So they're using both their magic and science to bring up something that magic alone could not bring up. Because obsidian is almost impossible to use with magic in the slightest. You cast a spell at obsidian, it does nothing. The Empire has an entire hall of obsidian sitting inside the Bright College for magical duels, so they can throw their most powerful spells, hit it into the chest of another wizard, and it almost bounces. All it does is it pushes them back a little bit, so they can have their big wizard duels and not kill each other. This whole city is made of it. It's actually crazy, and it speaks to a bigger project. Why has Hashut put them there where all this obsidian is? Why are they building this? What are they doing for Hashut? Exactly. It's one of those questions that if we'd been in command of the good old end times, there would have been a fucking answer.
Anywho, before we get off on that rant, so Zharr-Naggrund, the earliest stages of it are raised from the earth. It seems like the best way I could probably rationalize it is a very powerful ritual was unleashed by the sorcerer prophets, which used because the lore of Hashut manipulates the earth itself through magma. It literally causes superheated material to gather and manipulate the earth, and they can create like ash storms. They can make lava burst from the ground and all this stuff, which obsidian it's volcanic glass. So theoretically, if you were going to try and manipulate obsidian without manipulating it directly, that would be the best way to do it. So they push up all this obsidian into this giant fucking mountain. And this thing, I cannot express to you guys how big Zharr-Naggrund is. It is not a city as we think of it, where it's like, oh, you know, you have like a plane that you're building on, you got buildings and stuff. It is a giant fucking tower that is thousands upon thousands of feet high.
Yeah, and I mean, each one of the steps is several hundred feet high, and there's only 4 gates that go into it. The gates to east and west are the primary gates through, and they are on one of the tiers, almost the entire height of it. So big that it dwarfs, well, the dwarfs, making their way through it. And the gates to north and south, the River Ruin passes through that. And here's a good way to get the scale. The entirety of the Chaos Dwarf sea fleet harbors inside the city. All of it. And if you've ever played Man of War or ever watched any of the various Chaos Dwarf sea bonuses that they have, it's not a small fucking fleet. Their warships are freaking enormous, massive war engines. And these are not your, oh, I'm going out by sail, am I? No, these are proper steam-driven and sometimes demon-driven engines with massive paddles that can pretty much go across the ocean from one end to the other if they wish, and they dominate the oceans whenever they come out, but they don't come out that often. They only come out when they need more slaves and they need more resources because they're working towards something. They're building and they're building. So they've got the ability to go down the entire length of the River Ruin, down towards the sea in the south, or alternatively, because, you know, they're Chaos Dwarves, they built a canal up a fucking waterfall and then over to the North Sea, the Sea of Chaos up towards the north, all the way through, and then burst through all the ice up there, and they come out with not just 5 or 6, but sometimes scores of ships. And when they're particularly, let's say, desperate for resources, hundreds will come out, and they all harbor inside the city. And the harbor is not the main part of the city. That's just a part of the city. The river that runs through the center of it inside the enormous ziggurat. As we said, millions live within it.
Yeah, and it's worth thinking about how impressive the initial raising of the mountain was, and then the Chaos Dwarfs start carving each of these steps into its ideal shape for it, where you have 100 hundreds of foot tall walls is platform 1, which then has a city within it. And then there's another hundreds foot tall platform that has a higher tier city within it, and then another, and then another. And then on top of that, there's a fucking giant temple at the very tippy top.
In many respects, you're right here, Mandatus, in that it's not entirely unlike the industry of Barad-dûr, not Barad-dûr, I mean, and not Mordor. It's not unlike it, but it is in classic Warhammer fashion taken to dialed up to 11. I mean, everything's dialed up to 11 in Warhammer. Look at their hats. That's probably why they need such big gates to get into their city in the first place. And entirely dialed up to 11, because this city is utterly mental in terms of how big it is.
Yeah, so this city gets built, and as the Chaos Dwarfs, they all move into it, which I imagine was not easy at first. They probably had to move in like a lot of earth and other various materials to ensure that they could build properly within it with structures, and they started carving out mines around it, started digging out giant holes in the ground, giant pits where they could just dump things, and they started enslaving everything around Zharr-Naggrund for hundreds of miles. Yeah. Everything. Greenskins, ogres, humans, anything they could get their grubby little paws on was theirs. And they started working on the art of total and utter domination.
It sadly, though, almost comes to a crashing end multiple times because of this. The Chaos Dwarves don't actually number that much in numbers for the city as a whole, which I find quite fascinating, given that they have dropped a number of 1 million at one point. The number of greenskins that they've got inside that city massively outnumbers them. And they end up having rebellion after rebellion after rebellion, because greenskins like a good fight. And they don't, when you've got that many of them in one place, the amount of Y energy when you don't keep them down is going to constantly surge up, which causes all manner of issues. I think it's worth also saying, though, that in the earlier years, there were far fewer Chaos Dwarves. There may have only been, to begin with, a few hundred that moved to a few thousand, that moved to something else. It also potentially speaks to something that may be different between the Chaos Dwarves and the Dwarves. And it's something that's not expressly said anywhere, but it's also not expressly said. And that is, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a 50-50 split of gender here, of sex, because there's far more Chaos Dwarves arguably getting born than there are normal dwarves.
Yeah, Jonathan Scott. So essentially, kind of. The answer is kind of. So the Chaos Dwarfs took the best way to kind of think about why the Chaos Dwarfs are so scary is imagine dwarfs, but with no restrictions, with nothing holding them back. No, like they don't really have a moral compass holding them back. They don't have tradition holding them back. They are completely off the reins. And that includes with rune magic, where the dwarves have very strict laws when it comes to rune magic, how it can be used, how it can be taught, how it can be utilized, how it's supposed to be performed. But the Chaos Dwarves threw all that shit to the wind and have just focused on maximizing it as much as possible. And Hashut has taught them how to grossly pervert the concept of rune magic, where instead of it being where regular dwarfs are kind of functionally taking their rune hammers and their anvils of doom, and they're taking like the magic in its purest form, like essentially high magic, and binding it into runes to performing a specific function. The Chaos Dwarves adapted rune magic to its ultimate potential of taking entire fucking demons and binding them into items so that the items themselves become demonic artifacts that are alive, but forced to form specific functions.
I'm loving this comment coming in. Let me also add one other thing. You've got to remember that most of the runic magic development happens after the Chaos Dwarfs left. A great deal of it comes afterwards. It gets passed down to them from their ancestor gods that had turned their back on the Chaos Dwarfs. So you'll find that there's a very strong narrative break there if you wish it to be there. I.e., any writer who creates Chaos Dwarfs can give them as much or as little runic knowledge as they want and be justified by the background, because they had separated themselves, and it was early years before the great cataclysm and all the runes were being built. All the technology in place at that point is high tech. We're talking proper future vision shit, as the old Slan, all the way back with the old ones, doing their crazy stuff are in place. And then the cataclysm comes. They're separated off somewhere. Runes are created all over the place. The ancestor gods are building all manner of stuff. And the Chaos Dwarves are separated from much of that, arguably. Depends on which timeline you go with, though. You could have a timeline where they know it all because they've had a good 3,000 years almost steeped in that sort of lore before they're separated. So, yeah, there's different angles that you could certainly take. And I love this one.
Does Obsidian affect Wah energy? One of the reasons they built their city with it to have that many green-skinned slaves, or is this a happy side effect?
I think it's probably a happy side effect in that there was a reason that the city has been built the way that it has been built, and Hashut is almost certainly the one that's pushing this forward. They are worshipping Hashut like nobody's business. The top of that entire city is the enormous temple to Hashut, the bull-headed god. He's right up there. And does it stop Y energy? The answer is yes, it does.
Yeah, which is pretty critical because keeping that many greenskins in one place is a complete disaster waiting to happen. And to be fair to the Chaos Dwarfs, it is a disaster that happens a few times. But it would have been so much worse if the city was not made out of the material it's made out, because shamans are virtually useless in a city like that. Any wizard would be pretty much useless unless they know what they're doing, like the sorcerer prophets. And there's also something to be said, kind of focusing, I think, in on the concept of why it's built out of obsidian. You have to keep in mind that the Chaos Dwarf sorcerers and the demon smiths are constantly working with horrific amounts of magic and sorcery. They are using, Andy mentioned this earlier, Zharr-Naggrund is a trap. It is designed where the Chaos Dwarfs will perform ritual sacrifices and all sorts of different things, a lot of which is taught to them by Hashut. They perform very special ceremonies to lure demons in by tricking them in with offerings or trying to learn their true names and drawing them in that way. They use all sorts of rituals to summon and lure demons in, who then once they get there, they get trapped, which normally is even if you know what you're doing, like you're a very, very skilled demonologist, trapping demons is really fucking hard, even just like the most basic bitch lesser demons. But Chaos Dwarfs are regularly capturing greater demons and other horrifically powerful entities. And that's because they've built literally like the perfect cage. When they get a demon to kind of manifest, that demon is suddenly they're in a place where they're utterly starved. Like there's a physical form. The Chaos Dwarfs will have some sort of ritual or magical artifact that's giving them enough to stay in that spot. But suddenly they realize there's no winds for them to feed on. There's nothing. They're completely stuck.
One of the great qualities of the Chaos Dwarves is that they make pretty much all of the coolest demon shit that there is out there. If you've ever read about a great demon artifact, it's very likely it was at least sourced in with the Chaos Dwarves. Many of the enormous quantities of Chaos armor suits that are out there have been crafted by the Chaos Dwarves, many of which are also interlaced with demons. They've got demon engines that are quite literally capable of moving by themselves because they're possessed by demons. But they don't just work with demons as we understand it. The Warhammer world is a little bit less black and white than that. The concept of a demon is effectively something that lives from the realm of chaos, comes from there originally. But the realm of chaos is much more than just the realm of chaos. There's all manner of spirits and oddities over on the other side. And that includes, for example, all manner of actuary spirits, fire spirits. And these are very closely related to the types of magic that particularly appeals to the priests of Hashut, and they are often pulling in enormous fire demons, for want of a better description, from the planes of fire that lie on the other side, and manifesting them into all manner of engines that burst full of fiery power and can just melt anything around them. Hey, Hammond.
Going back to Andy's magic versus religion rant, is the lore of Hashut more so Hashut's blessings instead? Would that be why Hashut magic can be used there?
No, it's 100% magic.
Yeah.
It's magic.
Now, what's interesting, so I think focusing...
Like Chaos Sorcerers.
Yeah, focusing, I think, on the city itself, just because that is technically what we're here to do. I think it's worth breaking down at this point what exactly we know about Mingle Zharr-Naggrund, which is not a ton, but there are some really interesting tidbits. Which the first is, so we've talked about its size in that it's literally a mountain, and I saw some people in chat asking earlier, it appears like a mountain as you're approaching it. Like, even though it's down in this crater, it comes way out. Like, you would think you're approaching the Lonely Mountain when you're marching close, only to realize,
although it's regular, because it's a proper ziggurat.
Yeah. You wouldn't think it's a natural mountain, but you'd be like, oh my god, that thing's huge.
But it's a fucking mountain.
The other thing that we know, that's of course extremely important, is that the very tip-top layer is the Great Temple of Hashut. And it is big. It is a giant. It's not like, even though it's on the top layer, so therefore the smallest layer, it's not like it's an itty-bitty thing. It is a full-size temple dedicated to this god, and that's where the Bull Centaurs hang out. The Bull Centaurs act as the, Mendetas. Besides keeping the winds and demons dampened and caught, perhaps Obsidian is also why the wider world doesn't seem to realize they exist. It's the wider world. It's more due to a lack of exposure, and that getting there is so hard, and there's no reason to go there. To die.
The slave raiding parties that come out from the empire of the Chaos Dwarfs raid far and wide, meaning that very few will ever see it without being captured. And once you're captured, you're not getting away again. So it's not so much that the wider world doesn't know about it because of magic. They don't know about it because they're very, very good at what they do, which is enslaving other people, dragging them back home, working them till they die, and enslaving more people. There's just little out there that anyone's interested in, so there's no reason to go out into these plains. They're filled with greenskins and worse that are constantly at war with each other and the Chaos Dwarfs. It's just, I think it's more a matter of situation rather than necessarily trying to look for extra magical reasons for why this is the case.
Yeah, but so the Bull Centaurs, they live in this top level, the Great Temple of Hashut. They are its temple guardians. They are seen as the sacred representatives of Hashut himself, and they protect his things. And they also accept offerings on the part of Hashut and perform a lot of rituals to keep Hashut fed. Because one of the things that's very interesting about Hashut, almost in the kind of a sense of what you would expect from a fire god and a god of greed, is that Hashut is very demanding. He wants constant sacrifice. And there are lots of people that are brought up to the top level that the Bull Centaurs, who are noted as cannibals, which is interesting because that kind of implies they eat Chaos Dwarfs or other Bull Centaurs, but at the very least, they're flesh eaters. There's often, they will eat a lot of the sacrifices that come up, but what they're technically supposed to be doing is throwing people into these big vats of molten metal, which apparently feeds Hashut. And Hashut is very big into blood rituals, blood sacrifice, things that involve torment and death and agony. His rituals come at extreme cost. Let's see. The Silver Road runs near the Black Fortress and Tower of Gorgot. Do the Ogre Guards just keep the Darwizar far enough away that they're kept a rumor? So Cheshire Grin, great question. But the thing is that when you're looking at the Ivory Road or the Silver Road, you have to realize that on the map, while it looks like they're very close together, it's really not. Like, if you were to zoom in, there's lots and lots of miles between those distances. And the caravans that pass through those areas, the caravans that travel those roads are not caravans, they're armies. Giant fucking armies that try to make themselves look as intimidating as possible. So the Chaos Dwarfs and the monsters and everything will look at them and go, it's probably not worth it.
Yeah, but and most of them are escorted by an enormous amount of ogres as well if they're around that area.
Yeah, who know the area and know how to get past.
But I would argue that for those who are down there, they're much more than just a rumor. These are a known and feared enemy. For those who are down there, it's just that with the focus that most of the literature from Warhammer provides, which is old world centric, often empire centric, the Chaos Dwarves are so far away from that they're beyond a rumor. They're just not discussed at all. But the closer you get to them, the more that this black rumor, this fiery rumor, this awful rumor that sits towards the north becomes more of a fact. So I would dismiss the rumor part a bit, but also simultaneously 100% agree with what Sotek's saying there, which is, loosely speaking, it's a big distance.
an important thing to get across is that the Chaos Dwarfs are not like the Skaven. It's not like if you're in the Empire and you're like, oh, Chaos Dwarfs are a thing. There's nobody that's like, oh, you're not going to get like shot for being a weirdo, or people are not going to like look at you weird on the street. Now, a dwarf is probably going to physically assault you for bringing it up, but the Chaos Dwarfs are kind of seen as I guess they're real, or like maybe they're not, like they can't be that bad, or I've never heard of that. That's probably ridiculous. It's just, who cares would be kind of the biggest thing. Like, people got their own problems. And think of it this way. Think about how close Norska is and how common we think demons are. There are a lot of people in the Empire who do not believe demons exist.
Yeah,
they just don't.
It's kind of the same thing. Plus, as well, don't get your God view in the way of what the view on the ground is. A God view, as in us who have relatively objective facts and stories written in books, we can look at it and go, well, that's who they are. That's where they come from. Where the chap on the street making his way along that road, he sees a big piling army come thundering in with cavalry and big, huge blunderbusses and rockets firing through the skies, demonic engines coming down as well. They don't know they're demonic engines. They just see effectively a bunch of fiery dwarves arriving. If anything, they're more like fire slayers from Age of Sigmar than they are chaos per se. They're really not chaos. They're not sitting there with mutations and bubbly stuff and shouting blood for the blood god. Quite the opposite. It's all for something they've never heard of, a god they've never heard of, creatures they've never seen before. They're just weird dwarfs. That's all they are. Anyway, yes is the answer to that one, CEO of Necromancy.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. So anyway, Great Temple of Hashut.
Thank you.
We have these molten vats. People are being thrown into them. Sacrifices constantly being made. And it's not. What's interesting is the Sorcerer Prophets, while they are in charge, they're called Sorcerer Prophets for a good reason. They're kind of like the mage priests of the Lizardmen, where they hold the highest governmental, religious, and sorceress job. Like, they are the top echelon in all facets of society. They often do not make the sacrifices themselves. They usually lead it to the Bull Centaurs. They observe ceremonies. New Chaos Dwarfs.
No, they pretty much only trade with the Chaos tribes to the north for very specific reasons.
Yeah, and ogres, but that's about it.
Ogres, but even then, not much.
Yeah, no,
they enslave ogres.
Yeah, there are a couple tribes that are friendly with them, but those tribes are also not super well liked by other ogre tribes because they're a little nasty. But so below the Great Temple, the level below that is often implied to be where the foundries are, the forge foundries of the Chaos Dwarfs, which there are. I think it states that there's something like, I think there's like 12 great foundries, or something along those lines within the actual city itself, or the upper portion.
There's thousands. They mark the word thousands for the forges and et al. In more than one place. But as different writers have come in, they've attempted to characterize some of them and say there's this many of this sort and this many of this sort. But
there's a lot.
There's a lot, I think, is the answer. We've got a city of millions, depending on which version you go with. And almost all of it internally is centered around industry, dirt and grime and work. And it's not industry from the medieval era or the Renaissance. We're talking late 1800s, early 1900s. In fact, going right into First World War tech. The ships that they're building are First World War, Second World War versions. The rockets that they are building are post-Second World War. We're almost at modern times. And they're bigger, way bigger, with ranges that just make our weaponry, except for intercontinental ballistic stuff, look pretty dodgy. But they're also demon-laced, meaning that the rockets can go and then just vanish and then appear somewhere else and land down in the worst of it. We have got ourselves a massively advanced tech species working out from the plane here, and the inside is where everything is built. Some of these foundries are enormous, crafting huge ships in their shipyards, massive flying machines, everything else that you could possibly imagine, all of which are, the heat is enormous, the ash, the fallout, people die a lot in there. It is full of slaves.
What did the Taurus and Druki think of one another? I've covered a lot of these types of questions in the Q&A series, but generally when you have two races that are that level of arrogant and you put them in the same room, it's not going to go over super well.
I think you can answer it with a really easy one. One is chaos aligned and one is not. And for all Hashut is definitely its own god, it is definitely chaos aligned. The Dark Elves are not. The Dark Elves are evil. They are not chaos, which is an enormous difference.
Yeah. Like, have there been moments between them potentially out across the great oceans with like a Black Ark maybe trading or something like that? Maybe, but a lot of the time they're going to be attacking each other. They're not, neither of them are well known for diplomacy. Because why use diplomacy when you could just use force? Seems Chaos Dwarfs are only debatably rivalry by the Skaven in technology. Only Clan Scryer, and that is correct. But even then, Clan Scryer is more about raw power and building as quickly as possible and as much as possible without regards for anything else. Whereas the Chaos Dwarfs care more about craftsmanship and like individual prowess. So when they fight, it's bad. And they are equal in a sense, but it's different demonstrations of power.
Yeah, the Chaos Dwarves are reliable.
Yeah,
they come out with some proper crazy shit and some proper demonic nonsense. But their siege weaponry is unlike any other. Their abilities are almost unlike any other. The big difference between the Skaven and the Chaos Dwarves is the Chaos Dwarves very, very, very rarely go out to war. They are largely defensive. As others come to them, they will take them on and normally win. But they are not known for going out. Even when the great incursions of chaos come, you often find that they will just send a few allies along. They'll send a few priests. They'll send a few weaponsmiths or some equivalent, some siege weapons, some extra bits, but only a few. They're attached at the edge of the great hordes. They are not actually marching to war because apparently Hashut has got some better business for them to be dealing with.
Yeah, but so looking back at Zharr-Naggrund, we talked about the forges and foundries, but one of the things we do know that's very interesting why the city is built where it was is that the parts of Zharr-Naggrund that get the hottest and are the most dangerous to work with are on the bottom level. And it's because they all filter down into the river and they use it as a cooling system. Because the River Ruin, which comes down from the Falls of Doom, and it is super fucking cold. It is
Falls of Doom.
yeah, the Falls of Doom. And as it comes through the city, it does two main things, which is the first is that it cools off the most important parts of the machines of industry in Zharr-Naggrund, which use the river to keep themselves from overheating and breaking down. And the second thing is that it takes all of the refuse or all of the chemicals and the offshoot that is no longer valuable to them, all the just the super nasty, gross aspects of industry, and carries it out of the river to the point that when the River Ruin leaves the south gate of Zharr-Naggrund, it is a yellow, greenish, sludgy mess that is said to be so toxic that it literally has these like it has like a yellow acidic fog that comes off of it that if you were to breathe it in would probably it'd basically be like mustard gas taken to another level.
Zharr-Naggrund is a hive world. It's a proper hive.
Great way to put it. That's a great way to put it.
If you know your 40k lore, think of it like a hive city, because that's what it is. Right at the very top, you've got your leaders who are living in the wonderful temple idealism at the top, tyrannically ruling over everything down below. And the further down you get, the more hot it gets, the more despair rules. And there's Chaos Dwarves everywhere, Hobgoblin whip masters everywhere, because there's more Hobgoblins in Zharr-Naggrund than almost any other species. There are horrible industries everywhere, but it is a functioning society. Don't think of this as an evil, cackling, ridiculous society. It's not. This is a functioning society. They are living in homes. They are living in homes. They have got wives and children. I know this is ridiculous. Okay, but start thinking about this as the realistic place that it has to be. They've all got jobs that they do. They've got an enormous number of slaves that are largely responsible for not the work and the industry. They're largely responsible for the mining, for the extracting of the ores, for the grunt work. And one of the great things about the slowly expanding Chaos Dwarf empire is that the slave economies that they have are much less interested in helping them do the stuff around the house and everything similar. They're dwarves. They're very sensible and practical. They're about doing literally carrying important people around, grunt work to their core. And they're mostly down the mines. And that's, I think, the next part to loosely say about this place. It's not just surrounded by mines and works and heavy machines working down towards the very base of the earth. It is absolutely surrounded. Everywhere you go for hundreds of miles around, it's works after abandoned mine after abandoned mine. And also the remnants of more battles than you can shake a stick at, because the Greenskins have come up in rebellion against them multiple times. So much so that approximately 300 years before the time of Sigmar, they started a whole scientific sorcery project, which is a big one we can't skip by, because it's fundamental to the Warhammer world as a whole, fundamental to their character, took them a good few hundred years, and is also fundamental to who Hashut is, because Hashut doesn't appear to be just intrinsically interested in the dwarves, but also in the dwarves being completely and utterly in control of the Greenskins. Again, it feels really dwarfy. They want to control the Greenskins because they're an enemy and use them. It really does feel dwarfy.
Yep. And just to answer this, Richard, just because we won't probably be coming back to the River Ruin, it literally just goes south through the Darklands, past the Black Fortress, out into what's known as the Mouth of Ruin, where it exits out into the Sour Sea.
Sea of Despair. Sea of Despair.
Yeah, sorry. Sea of Despair. Which is nasty.
Because of course, the Sea of Despair.
But not a great place because it's so toxic. It's just awful.
No good place to go.
Yeah. So as Andy was saying, the dwarves had spent at this point somewhere in the ballpark of 2,400 years ish having greenskin slaves all over the place. So hundreds of millions of greenskins have probably been gathered and died over the course of these thousands of years. And the Chaos Dwarfs, for all that they are cautious about a lot of things when it comes to expansion, there are a lot of notes where the Chaos Dwarfs, under Hashut's teachings, have really lived by the ideology that they're very keenly aware of the fact that most forces in the world go out and they're too aggressive. Whether you're looking at the tribes of the north or the greenskin tribes, they run out and they start fighting everybody, and they overstretch themselves and they peter out. And the Chaos Dwarfs can't afford to do that, because if they do, they're going to die out and it's going to be bad. So they very slowly and meticulously expand. And the other thing about Zharr-Naggrund is it's always being added on to. It's always growing larger, which is terrifying. It's constantly under construction, endlessly, ever growing larger. And it's also described as an iceberg, which is even more horrifying, because for all that we've described how big the city is, that's only the tip. The vast majority of Mengel's Zharr-Naggrund is below the earth in the form of mines and parts of like an undercity, and just deep, literally described as miles down into the earth.
I think this is an interesting point, Sam, because Hashut does appear to be very hands-on, and it does suggest that it could be a remnant of the Cataclysm and one of the earliest types of demon princes like Be'lakor himself, who is actually in the Warhammer world, physically manifested, perhaps underneath this enormous temple where they've come. That would be one answer to that. It would work particularly well if there was a literal dwarf underneath there who was Hashut, for example. He's a living ancestor that is powering them all. That would work. Or it's a demon prince that came from the north and was driven out by Be'lakor. That would work. Or it's somehow another god that somehow manifested. All of those work. But the hands-on part, I think, is definitely the case.
Yep. But as we're looking at the Chaos Dwarfs expansion, there's one area that they were not conservative, and that was in drawing in greenskins. Loads of them, but they were able to handle it. There'd be rebellions every once in a while. Sure, the greenskins would try and fight back, but the Chaos Dwarfs were able to just overwhelm them through superior arms and firepower and beat them back down, and the greenskins eventually learned to be properly afraid of them. But in the typical form of greed,
no, they didn't.
Yeah, and an expression of greed, the likes of which is borderline unrivaled in its level of stupidity. Looking back, the Chaos Dwarfs decide to do something absolutely mad, which is they, to put it bluntly, decide to genetically experiment and enhance.
That comes for a reason. It comes because they are almost wiped out. There's multiple rebellions against Chaos Dwarf rule. The first ones they barely suppress and put down. However, one takes over almost the entirety of Zharr-Naggrund. We don't know who the warlord was, but it was a green-skinned warlord, and almost all of Zharr-Naggrund falls. So we've got the Chaos Dwarf species almost entirely being wiped out. A very few remain. The sorcerers at the top, some Chaos Dwarves, they got fought up to, I think, like the second last tier, up to the top, before eventually they then crushed the Greenskin Rebellion and pushed back down. They are, at this point, incredibly low numbers, where almost as low as perhaps when they very first came out and tried to settle down here. We're not talking about the modern version where they have massively expanded in terms of their population number. And they're in trouble because they have an enormous empire that they need to tend to, and it's not small because by this point they've spread out across the Plane of Bone, beyond it, and created several extra large, enormous mines around about them. And many of them are connected. There's canals, there's trains and equivalents carrying ore all the way back to the capital to be used for all their experiments. And they needed to maintain their dominance, not just because it was an important part of ensuring that their civilization continued. It's their character. It's what they do. And that is what started them off on genetically modifying greenskins, which is frankly mental.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a mix-up there because it's the Black Orc Rebellion that causes the rebellion that gets all the way up to the second tier.
Oh, you're right. That is the one that gets up to the second tier. Yeah, you're right. No, you're right. It's all the rebellions first, and then that one. Yes,
I do agree.
You should have cut in.
I do agree, though, that it is that the Chaos Dwarfs wanted more control over their empire, but realized they couldn't do it. There's not enough of them. Like because that's just one of the things that's really interesting about the Chaos Dwarfs is a lot of people look at their empire and go, wow, they control the whole Darklands. They don't. They control their city and a little space around it, and that's it. They don't control anything else. And they just send stuff to each other through their armored convoys on their trains. But they really don't control much at all of the Darklands, which is how the Ivory Road and the Silver Road are able to pass through without much issue a lot of the time. But Andy's right in that they wanted more control. And they also wanted more reliable slaves because greenskins, for all they're good in that there's a lot of them, they're not the best workers. They get distracted easily. They die easily when it's like really, really hot.
They rebel. They're sneaky fuckers and they rebel.
And so there was a Chaos Dwarf, unnamed, who one of the Sorcerer Prophets, there's probably a good reason his name was not recorded. He sat down and said, what if we had a slave that we could make populate as quickly as greenskins do, because that's the best thing about them. We will get to the Hell Cannons. Those are actually relatively modern. We will get to those. But what if we had a slave that could populate as easy as greenskins do, but had the stamina of an ogre, but did everything we told them to because we made them?
Yeah, overseers. What if we had greenskins we could rely on as overseers?
Yeah, so they started doing genetic experiments, which you may say, wow, that sounds really futuristic. Once again, Chaos Dwarfs are fucking bonkers sci-fi.
Yeah, sorcerer scientists. They're sorcerer scientists, and they worked right down into how orcs work and figured it all out, and then removed the part that made them fractious. And boosted them a bit. So they basically made an uber orc, an orc that was no longer filled with that animosity that all orcs have for anything around, that need to constantly fight and push up and one-upmanship everything around them until eventually one of them rises bigger and better than the rest and swells up in size and puts down the rest as a warlord.
They made orcs that did not have ADHD.
Yeah.
Cleaned it out.
In some respects, they made warlords that didn't need to go through the process of becoming warlords. They made them pre-warlord. They cut out that section and just went, no, we're going to make them like this from the beginning. Oops.
And to be fair, they completely succeeded. They created the Black Orc, which is bigger, tougher, virtually never needs to rest, And they're
clever,
smart. They're
smart,
really smart, and they don't get distracted. Black orcs are notoriously kind of weird by greenskin standards because they don't have fun like other greenskins do. They don't hoot and holler and loot and smash to have a good time. They're focused.
We is business.
Yeah, which is very scary. And the Chaos Dwarfs started making them, and at first, everything went fine. These Black Orcs could handle far more complex orders. They were able to handle jobs that regular greenskins would expire trying to do, and everything was going great.
And other greenskins automatically respected them because they were bigger, which meant that they didn't do what greenskins tend to do, where they're constantly looking for a leader. They're constantly bashing each other, swearing at each other, arguing with each other, attempting to establish that hierarchy of one-upmanship until one rises above the rest and starts to lead them. That didn't happen because there was already a bigger one there saying, "Oi, lads, down!" And they were like, "Oh, sorry, boss." And immediately they went back down again, meaning that the classic cycle of greenskin warlord creation was cut off at the head. And it was, all things said and done, a stroke of genius, because the Chaos Dwarfs had managed to control all of the greenskins in their empire, which was huge. It's all of the area around their city, and the mine here, and the mine there, and the mine there, and suddenly it's all beginning to tick along like clockwork.
Yep. But like Andy said, and like I've said,
the bit that I said earlier, oops.
Oops. Because the Black Orcs were so smart that they started to kind of look around and do some math and say, there's a lot more of us lads than there are of them lads. And they started telling the greenskins to rebel, because the only thing Black Orcs do enjoy in a fashion is fighting. Because the Chaos Dwarfs got rid of all the extra stuff, which was the thing that kind of led to greenskins making accidents or getting distracted. Black Orcs didn't get distracted. So they started turning their attention to the Chaos Dwarfs and say, "Oi, stick them!" And they all of a sudden, the Chaos Dwarfs started dealing with rebellions that were happening faster and faster and faster. And they started to link up with each other, where Black Orcs would get together and instead of just fighting each other, would just nod and then start fighting the Chaos Dwarfs. And they surrounded the city. And then the orcs inside of the city started rebelling. So the gates got thrown open and the Chaos Dwarfs go, "Oh shit." Because then the Black Orcs did something really genius, which is they started taking the Chaos Dwarfs' own weapons and turning them around against the city itself. Which the Chaos Dwarfs did not think was possible.
The thing with the Black Orc Rebellion, the one that I accidentally started earlier in the conversation, the thing with the Black Orc Rebellion is that it was almost wholly successful. The problem with the Black Orc Rebellion is that there was Black Orcs on the other side. It wasn't a universal rebellion. The Chaos Dwarves, for all they were fighting a retreating battle all the way up, they were winnowing out absolutely any who were potential traitors until they were left with a hardcore set of extremely powerful Chaos Dwarves at the top with the most powerful weapons and supported by elite cadres of Black Orcs and other slaves. And it's a war they will eventually win, but it's enormously damaging. Enormously damaging.
Zharr-Naggrund is kind of almost sacked in a sense. Like the entire city didn't fall, but the vast majority of it does.
Yeah.
And like Andy said, the two major players are that not all the greenskins rebelled, and there was one particular faction that really fucked everything up, which was the Hobgoblins.
The Hobgoblins, here we go.
This is the moment where they get their role, in that the Hobgoblins did a very interesting thing, which is that they are such backstabbing, cowardly little shits that when the greenskins were, for all intents and purposes, potentially going to win, the Hobgoblins kind of looked around and said, "What if we backstabbed everybody? Wouldn't then, like, yeah, sure, we'd still be slaves, but we'd be the top slaves." And that's exactly what they fucking did, is that they started attacking their fellow greenskins. They started silencing the groups on the war machines, turning the war machines against the regular greenskins. Yeah, stabbing a lot of people in the back. And the Chaos Dwarfs were able to take advantage of the confusion, surge out, and push the greenskins out.
And this gives the Hobgoblins a position within Chaos Dwarf society that to this day is largely still the case. They are now largely, the slave masters. They are the ones who control the orcs, that control the goblins, that control the humans. And whilst, of course, there are many hobgoblin slaves as well, they're constantly doing slave raids out and towards the northern steppe, for example, to take more hobgoblins in. The hobgoblins in Chaos Dwarf society are higher stationed, higher status than anything other than the Black Orcs. The Black Orcs are obviously now very carefully watched for, I think, fairly obvious reasons.
So that's one of the interesting things is that the lore disagrees with itself about Black Orcs now. And well, it depends on the edition. In the older lore, they kept them around, but they very carefully watched them. In the newer lore, it says they just got rid of them. They were like, you know what? Too big of a risk. Just get rid of them. Now, what's interesting, we're not going to focus on this, but what's very interesting is that the Chaos Dwarfs or the Black Orcs get flushed out of the city, and this is the origin of Black Orcs. And this is also the origin of greenskin smiths that come to the old world. And wouldn't you happen to know that only 300 years later, the biggest and scariest orc wa that will ever be came rumbling up into Blackfire Pass, led by a Black Orc. And almost wiped out the entire Dwarf Empire, which is like, oh my God, that's how effective these things were.
Yep.
Yeah, the Chaos Dwarfs nearly caused the apocalypse. Good job, morons.
And are, because of their sorcery science, responsible for what ultimately becomes one of the most powerful orcs in the world ever. And indeed, it's fair to say that if we were again to look into our 40k side, all of the most powerful 40k orcs we know would be children in comparison to what the Black Orcs could be in the same realm. The Black Orcs are just that much bigger and that much better than the orcs. Now, other orcs can rise up to and almost become the same as a Black Orc. But in the end, the Black Orc starts at a higher base. They're just better, they're sharper, they're bigger, they're more intelligent. And whilst they always have those orky traits, and some writers forget that they're clever, some writers seem to think that Black Orcs are just normal orcs, but black or bigger or something, meaning that some of their descriptions are not necessarily as Black Orcy as they could be. It's fair to say that they are pretty much the uber orc. They are the big orc, and they are potentially the only thing that could stand against the Never-Chosen come the end times.
Yeah, good old headbutt.
As we will find out.
Yeah.
Bob!
Yeah. So, yeah, the Chaos Dwarfs play, if you look at it from that angle, the Chaos Dwarfs actually play a very hilarious role in the end times without meaning
to. Yes,
they do. So back to the city itself, it does recover from this, though it takes like a lot of the reason that the Chaos Dwarfs probably are not as much of an active force as you might expect, considering the thousands of years they had to build up, is that they kind of had to do a reset button.
Yep.
And take another almost 3,000 years to build themselves back up in preparation for something. It's never really explicitly clear what exactly they're up to.
It's so sad, isn't it? Because there is such a story sitting there waiting to be told because it's pregnant. It's clear that the Chaos Dwarves are building, and they are building carefully. They fucked up in the past, so they covered up their fuck up, and they sorted that out. And they're now building again. They've replaced their Black Orcs with other things, or if you go with the older lore, the Black Orcs are very much brought under heel. Many of them are kicked out, and a few of them stay behind. The ones who were loyal stay behind. They've still got the tech after all. And some of them, I imagine, have been controlled using a mixture of high collars and other horrendous magical artifacts. So there's almost certainly Black Orcs and similar still there, even if they don't necessarily hit some army lists. Because they made the tech after all. But cutting it all down, they're doing something, and it's clearly something that Hashut wants, and we're moving directly towards the end times throughout the course of this period. As 2,000 years leaves this city one of the largest. I don't want to say that, like the old lore said, that it is the largest. It's one of the largest in the entirety of the Warhammer world. There are very few cities that are as huge as Zharr-Naggrund. They're just not. There are a lot of Chaos Dwarves that are preparing for something. There are an enormous amount of weapons that make the rest of the weapons across the old world into Cathay and elsewhere look somewhat childish. They are a mixture of high technology and high sorcery, and unlike the Skaven, they're pretty reliable. Their biggest issues is that they're often demon engines, and it's the demons that are unreliable. But if anything, they make them all the more powerful because they can take all of the science that works behind the core explosives that they're using and then add the horror of magic on top of that. They are a species that is just waiting to have something to do. But of course, as we all know, come the end times, well, I imagine
We're not going to worry about that. Zharr-Naggrund, yeah, it gets a sad little footnote. Thank you to Total War for actually giving them stuff to do.
Yeah, but, absolutely.
Yeah. So looking back at the city, kind of some interesting things that I'd like to kind of pick Andy's brain about.
Yes.
That I've always.
Although I couldn't even remember the Black Orcs led that rebellion. So
you're all good. You're all good.
My brain's well picked out already.
So so we've discussed that you have these terraces, these different steps, and like Andy said earlier, the higher up you are, the more important you are. There is a very strong note in the Chaos Dwarf lore that the closer you are to the Temple of Hashut, the nicer it is, and also the more importance you have, to the point that if you're a Chaos Dwarf and something bad happens, like you screw up, or you make a demon engine that misfires, or you run from battles, something happens, you will literally lose your position and be sent to a lower tier. It's not a good time. But what's interesting is that each of these tiers have various roles they perform, and that there are things going on that when you look at the Chaos Dwarfs, you don't think about. Doomrider, could the Obsidian Tower be used to sacrifice a god to Hashut?
I would suggest that of any place in the world, it's one of the better options because gods rely upon magic. They are creatures of the realm of chaos. They are creatures of the realm of the divine realms, the realms of the gods, whatever you want to call it. And that means that the obsidian that is at play, the enormous pyramid of the stuff, doing whatever it is that obsidian does to disrupt magic, causing the magic to stay away from it. It is the perfect place to trap a god. It's very possible that the reason that this exists is not because Hashut's under it, because Hashut doesn't like what is under it. Perhaps Hashut isn't the great fiery demon. Perhaps the fiery demon is what they're controlling with their pyramid, and Hashut is something that's very much happy to abuse it. A bull-headed god of a different type, perhaps. There's all manner of different stories you could tell. In fact, I could probably, between the pair of us, I reckon we could probably tell 10 really good stories, all of which contradict. All of which would be really good answers for how this could be represented in the end times or in a head up to an end times or something similar, which is ultimately my biggest issue with it. Could it? Yes. Was it? No.
Yeah, I agree. Kabanda, well, they're building all those demonic siege engines when that's a little overkill for orc forts. Feel like they want to crack some Dawi hold open. Well, so it's implied they want to dominate the planet. Is kind of like the end goal, is to march out one time and win. Not to march out multiple times, but once. But the thing the Chaos Dwarfs do that's very, very clever is the reason you don't see a lot of Chaos Dwarf armies is that they essentially sell or even sometimes lend out their war machines to other factions. So the Hell Cannon is a great example. The Hell Cannon is a relatively recent invention by the Chaos Dwarfs, and you'll notice that it's crewed by Chaos Dwarfs.
Arguable.
You almost argue that Black Orcs are kind of just Krorks. but you have this you have this idea that the Chaos Dwarfs, they crew the Hell Cannons. It's not like Warriors of Chaos crew the Hell Cannons. Yep. And it's because the Chaos Dwarfs are literally using those battles as testing fields. They're exhibit performances. They're taking the Hell Cannons out, lending them to the Warriors of Chaos, and allowing them to go to these battles to see how they perform, see how reliable are, how they can be fine-tuned, how they can be built to be better. That's why they're there. That's the big thing that's kind of examined with Archaon's invasion, is the Chaos Dwarfs kind of forge a contract with them saying, oh yeah, we'll send you experimental weapons, but in return,
we require souls, we require warpstone, we require minerals, we require all manner. They're traders. They're definitely traders, because there's multiple examples of the northern tribes of chaos, for want of a better word to describe. But the northern tribes doing clean trades. We get so much chaos armor, we get so much support in return for a whole host of slaves, a whole host of minerals, or indeed the big one, warpstone.
Yeah, a lot of the Warriors of Chaos stuff that you see, like a lot of their fancy swords and shields and armor and stuff, the vast majority of it is made by Chaos Dwarfs.
Yep. The shitty ones, the ones that look like they're just big cleavers and have been very poorly put together, they're just hammered bits of metal or whatever. They're the ones that are coming from the northern tribes. Many of their basic weapons are coming from the northern tribes, but the big demonic weapons, the stuff that's not just been gifted to them by the gods, may have come from the Chaos Dwarves a couple of thousand years ago and done a big long tour, or may have just been bought from the Chaos Dwarves somewhat more recently.
Yeah, because the Chaos Dwarfs, they're known for making, like, I mean, they're an industry. They're constantly making stuff, and they'll take a lot of they keep the best tools for themselves, but if they make something and, like, any batch is going to have some stuff that's better than others. That's just a nature of the universe. They'll take the lower quality stuff and say, all right, we'll ship this off to whatever tribe, or we'll trade it to somebody in exchange for other things. That's why there's, like, entire ogre tribes that are allies with them, most notably the Ironskin tribe. The Ironskin tribe, they are all about that life of they go out, capture large groups of people, slaves from Cathay or wherever, greenskins, and they all go over to Zharr-Naggrund and trade them stuff, to the point that Gark Ironskin, their big bad tyrant, rides a demonically empowered mecha Rhinox, which is really
mental
fucking scary because Rhinoxen are huge, and the fact that his is basically a juggernaut is crazy.
And that, I think, ultimately is where we have to again say, look, they're clearly doing something. They can make some extraordinary shit. If they wanted to rule the world and push out, they would push out much further than they have. But they are expressly described as moving out very slowly, only going to concentrations of minerals that they require for whatever it is they're building, consolidating that, and then attaching it by rail or caravan, depending exactly on how it's linked up to the capital. And it comes out in small spines, and they don't care about the territory that lies in between. They only care about the holes that they then sink down into the earth and the mines that are down there. But why? The big why of it all. What is their point? What is their motivation? What does Hashut want? Because they are all working towards Hashut's goal. And that, I think, is the fascinating unanswered question about the Chaos Dwarves as a whole.
Yeah, I think the idea that I would
yeah, okay, T-Rex.
we're not doing that debatable. Speaking of demons / warp engines, what is the benefit of binding demons to weapons, and really how does that make the weapon stronger?
Okay, so just to cut this down into its very simplistic basics, you put a demon into a weapon and it almost always imbues that weapon with a particular power. There's various different ways you can make that happen as the person binding it in. There's pacts that can be made. There's various magical spells that you can use to help channel it, but it can do everything from giving the Bade a biting set of teeth that literally starts consuming as it works its way through, or it can suck souls, or it can give you extra strength as some of the demon strength leeches into you. There's all manner of different ways it does it, but loosely, you have a demon weapon, it's fucking nasty, and it's going to do a lot of nasty things to whomever you're fighting. Demons make an enormous difference to material weapons, and that's not just for swords, that's for ranged weapons, that's for cannons, that's for pretty much anything. Demons enormously empower weapons.
Yeah, like you're putting a sentient magical entity behind whatever it is you've bound it to make it more lethal and efficient.
Might not be happy about it, though.
Oh, no, dude. Yes.
Often won't be. They are, after all, tyrants. Remember, these Chaos Dwarves are not dealing in demons in the way that they, hey, demon, do you want to come in? It's much more, you're coming in. Let's mess about with you now.
I would say there's an extreme argument that Zharr-Naggrund building made out of obsidian is a defense against demons and the retribution of the dark gods.
I agree.
For doing a lot of the shit that they do. Because I would actually posit the idea that if Zharr-Naggrund is building up like it is on pure defense, there's almost an argument to be made that they know the end times is coming, and what better defense to have against an apocalypse of magic than an entire city of anti-magic?
What if, there's a really good story, one of the many potential what ifs. And what if all they're doing is basically building a spaceship to move into Age of Sigmar? In that when the world blows up and magic goes wild, they are safe inside their anti-magical bubble. And off they go, Chaos Dwarfing away. Beep, beep! But with a big, huge exhaust coming out the back of them.
We know they've survived into AOS. They don't have an army book yet. There's a lot of build up to them getting an army book, but it's not here yet.
Well, there we go.
Anyway,
So that does that.
It wouldn't be a parental argument. It would be a murder scene of the most brutal. Like, you cannot put a dwarf and a chaos dwarf within line of sight of each other without them doing everything in their physical power to kill one another. Because it's, I don't even know how to describe it appropriately, of what they represent to one another is like the ultimate insult to what they are.
Massively antithetical to each other. One is everything that dwarves absolutely fear inside their hearts is a possibility, because made manifest. It's everything that they say is right, suddenly in front of them apparently being wrong. It just doesn't work. And on the other side, it's a manifestation of weakness. They're just weak. They're nothing more than sad reflections of their ancestors before, and weak examples of that, if anything. Where is their innovation? Where is their next step? Why are they so pathetic? Yeah, they do not get on. I'll bring up this one very quickly. I haven't done it yet, so I don't know. I'm currently, my ceiling, you may know, I don't know if you can see it here. My ceiling is a complete state. We had a flood, and I'm about to get this entire room kitted out. It's costing us an arm and a bloody leg, but yeah, as is often the case. But that's why I haven't started up playing on anything yet, because we're gutting everything out of this room to go into another room, so we can get this room redone.
I think
and then move everything back in.
I think you'll like it. We'll have to see one day. It's very sci-fi from a fantasy perspective.
Super looking forward to playing it. Hey, Matthew. Building a demon construct that's powerful enough for Hashut to inhabit is something I would think. So that works quite well.
Could be true.
So they can just go on their one invasion tour. I think that could be true, although it feels almost small-minded given their tyrannical ambitions. Because ultimately, they're intelligent folk. There's a deal that has been struck. What is the deal? And if the deal is just conquer the world, they'd be doing it now. Yeah, there is nothing to hold them back from pushing it outwards. It's clearly conquering the world. It would only be a step. There's clearly something else there. Manifesting Hashut, I think Hashut could possibly manifest itself if it wished to do so during any one of the various incursions of chaos. So again,
yeah, I actually personally love what they go with in the Total War storyline, which to, I guess, super summarize it for Andy, is the Total War storyline they end up running with is that the Chaos Dwarfs are trying to create a drill that can pierce it pierces the fabric between realities, because they're trying to drill into the realm of Hashut itself, like create a permanent gateway between them and one of the realms of chaos, which, like, I think is great. That's awesome.
That's a good story, and it certainly gives you a reason for them to be doing all the things they're doing. And you'd probably do that beneath the pyramid, I imagine. Right down, and then into Hashut's realm. Yay! Habit for Song of Power. Think of Ebony Sword of Skyrim. I don't know the Ebony Sword of Skyrim. Should I? Did I miss something?
I don't know what he's referring to by that.
Neither do I. I'm quite happy. I've completed Skyrim like 3 times, and I can't.
I know. It's like I remember ebony weapons, and I remember that super annoying ebony knight you fight at the end.
Mandatus. The fact that hell cannons use souls harvested from the slave pens in the battlefield is wonderfully horrific. I completely agree. And their contempt for the four, and I think that's an important thing to always remember. Contempt. They are better.
There's some things I wanted to ask Andy about, and I kept getting distracted. So, looking at Mingle's Zharr-Naggrund, one of the really interesting things to consider that we kind of touched on a little bit is that this has to be an entire city, meaning it needs everything a city needs to survive. So, one of the things that's super interesting about the Chaos Dwarfs is the concept that this means they need to have farms. They need to have something that can sustain their people and feed them and keep them alive. And it's interesting to consider what it could be, because we know that Mingle's Zharr-Naggrund, for all that the upper levels may be nice, there is no sunlight. There's no sunlight in Zharr-Naggrund. Yep. Like, the sun is completely...
Well, they're dwarves. They're dwarves. And you could argue that we're going to go down either one of 2 obvious routes, and then a whole bunch of shit.
Yeah, this is what I want to hear Andy's opinion on how the dwarves of Zharr-Naggrund survive.
Yeah. So we've got 2 obvious routes to answer on here, and then we have the extra, no one's really thought about it, we should write more about this and make sure that the details make sense. The 2 obvious ones is 1, meat. They are constantly working on a cycle of meat that they're pulling in from elsewhere. That's not going to last long enough, not unless they've got proper breeding pens, but it does suggest that that may be the case, suggests that their entire economy and their internal eating structures are based on eating their slaves, eating their opponents, eating other Chaos Dwarves who are weak. Meat is on the menu, boys, on an almost permanent basis. And that I can certainly see. It's an exhaustible supply, but given the size of the city and the number of slaves they have and the fact that they can be bred, is at least something you can go, I can see how it might work. Do we then move into orcs and greenskins in general that are bred in a different way? They can be grown like fungus. And we know that dwarves down in their holds use a variety of different fungi that they eat as well. They don't just have crops sitting at the top of their holds. Down beneath them, they use often different types of fungus. And that would work very well here, both breeding the orcs for slave stock, consumption, and also for the funguses and the other funguses that they would have already been aware of as dwarves coming out from the mountains anyway. So we've got the second obvious route, which is fungus in all of its various kinds. The ones that the dwarves are very used to harvesting and the ones that they're perhaps normal dwarves would not be harvesting, the greenskin kind. That also makes sense. And they kind of intermix there. The whole meat is on the menu, boys, mixed with fungus. And then the third one, which is clearly they have to eat and they're not using farms as we traditionally understand them. The surrounding lands around Zharr-Naggrund are an enormous plain of wasteland and lava and old abandoned mines, huge piles of slag and detritus, old alchemical slag piles that from past experiments sitting there, probably irradiated and horrible. There's a really bad surrounding about the place, but it's still mineral rich. The slag of yesteryear suddenly becoming useful as they make further technological advances, and realize that they can use these. So the entire place is filled with not farms, but people and waste and horror. So we are either farming on the inside or we're not farming at all. Cut a long story short, you would have to either rewrite Chaos Dwarves as they currently are and add some form of food, or alternatively just accept that there is enough raiding description, I suppose, in their background to justify them constantly going out, taking in new meat, taking in resources from other people, and that would loosely do. Now, would that do for a city with a population of anything from 1 million up to several million? I think that the answer to that is doubtful.
Yeah,
it would require a lot of fungus.
Yeah, what I do find interesting, the idea of them like using greenskins, which can propagate very fucking fast.
Yeah.
As a food source, and even like if they can create black orcs, even creating like horrific forms of greenskins that are literally just used for food.
Quakes of all types.
Yeah, is that the Chaos Dwarfs, the only thing we do know about them culinary wise is they do have something along the lines of like a blood beer, which is like the beer they brew literally is made of blood or has blood as a major component of it, which is fucking disgusting. And I don't understand how that would work, but I guess blood can ferment if you put the right things in it. Blood with hops. But
it's the world of magic. You can do whatever you want.
So, and considering all the notes about how like the bull centaurs are cannibalistic and the chaos dwarves are not that different, I do think there could be a very strong suggestion of the idea that they have a horrific meat-based culture.
Yeah,
which really would tap into the worst aspects of capitalism.
I could see, totally. I could see long tables in their halls with the Chaos Dwarves. They're all sitting down. They're being served by greenskins and humans and whatever other slaves that they've got. And it's just piles and piles of meats of different kinds, which they're carving off and eating, necking it down with blood beer and similar. That makes sense. It suits their character to a T, and possibly all sauteed up with various fungal stuff. That all works as well. So yeah, they could do it. It would require a lot of orc farming though. But we get the opinion, it seems that they do that. So
yeah. Though I do like the idea of like if you entered Zharr-Naggrund, if someone ever drew a map of it, like the lower levels are all the horrible industry you would expect. But then as you get up to the upper tiers, there's like unexpected greenery. Like there's somehow beautiful gardens, or the ebony blade. Okay, the nature garden. Yeah.
Thanks, Holy Artist. Super appreciated there.
Yeah, but I do like the unexpectedness of that. Like, oh, clearly the Chaos Dwarfs couldn't be possibly capable of any form of beauty.
Yeah.
But with their ability to manipulate heat and understanding how to use the minerals of the earth to its ultimate resource, kind of having like the hanging
Gardens of Babylon
type
at the
thing
top.
up at the top. Like that would be a very interesting visual, unexpected thing for the Chaos Dwarf Sorcerer Prophets to have.
I don't think it would ever happen though in official lore. I mean, if I was tasked to write this, I would probably go down a particularly long Wikipedia dive, looking for lots of different ways I could justify it and see if I could make the populations work. And I think I probably could. I mean, the farming of greenskins alone would allow it to work. What the greenskins are eating, and then you just have to start working around until eventually you've got enough fuel in for everyone. Where's the grass equivalent that all the cows and the sheep are eating that we then eat in turn? You need to ensure that you've got everything in place there. And as it currently stands, there's no strong grass equivalent. What's the bottom of the food chain here? So I would go down a very long Wikipedia dive to try and get it to work. But I think meat-based culture makes sense. Yeah, anyway, Hieronymus, what kind of horrific... Oh, go for it.
What kind of horrifically good or bad demonic weapons / machinery could the Chaos Dwarfs make with Gelt's soul? Yes. They
just devour him because it's all he deserves.
I don't know. That might not go down under their gullet. Well, they might get upset tum-tums.
I refuse to let him live under any circumstance. Let the man die.
Yeah, the average person, like human souls, are not worth much to the Chaos Dwarfs, other than being used as bait for demons. They use a lot of human souls as bait.
And I think the answer to this is probably yes.
I mean, humans can eat mushrooms. Yeah. Like, you just have to be careful about which ones.
Yeah, loads of them are poisonous, particularly
like don't eat a madcap.
But to orcs and greenskins in general, most of the mushrooms are not just edible; they're very edible, and they're also very fleshy. The mushrooms that create greenskins tend to be the more fleshy kind, the ones that if you fried it in a pan, you might actually mistake for a good steak, because they're heavy. Proto-orc.
Yeah, two random facts, one of which is hilarious, one of which kind of like there are dwarfs that talk about in desperate situations you can eat greenskin. It's not great eating, but you can eat them. It's not going to kill you. But there is a really hilarious quote from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition, the Old World Bestiary, that I always love, where when it's talking about greenskins and goblins in particular, there's a goblin that gets interviewed and he talks about how he thinks this goblin shaman is talking about how he thinks the relationship between humans and goblins is beautiful because they fight each other and they both enjoy fighting, and they even eat each other because they eat one another. And then there's an ellipsis at the bottom, and he goes, "What do you mean you don't eat us?" Like, he gets insulted that the humans don't eat the goblins. He's like, "How dare you?"
Another Mac Hashut with my Stonefire Blood Brew. Less green this time, or you're in for the next batch of birders. Was it? Says Mandatus, and yes, that.
Yeah,
although
especially, I mean, for the Chaos Dwarfs,
that's more Blood Bowl.
Yeah, for the Chaos Dwarfs, I would honestly be pretty inspired by like how horrific, like, we don't like to think about it, but how horrific factory farming is in the real world. Mm-hmm. And like, if you dial that up to 11 for the Chaos Dwarfs, yeah.
And yeah, totally. And instead of having yourself the battery of chickens or the battery of orcs or whatever it might be, they're actually doing jobs as well. So they're not just sitting in their cages, they're actually doing stuff, because the Chaos Dwarves are the freaking worst. The only issue you need to resolve to make it all work is what sits at the bottom of the food chain and how does it work up. We all know that greenskins are quite capable of creating their own food chain, in that the squiggly things are squigs that come out first. Then the goblins come out. The goblins eat the squiggly things and the mushrooms, which in turn create eventually orcs, which eat all the way back down the chain again. So they can effectively create themselves enough to not only survive underground miles away from anything, they create an entire ecosystem that they work within. That's fun. It's a bit complicated because in the Warhammer world, it's never really properly figured out exactly how, say, night goblins only make night goblins, or orcs or forest goblins or whatever, and why it doesn't turn into 40k. But the answer to that is almost certainly magic.
Yeah. So the other thing that's interesting, as far as Zharr-Naggrund goes, and talking about like what they're creating there and what they're building up towards, me and Andy, we touched on this a little bit ago, but I think it's worth really talking about that one of the things I find really fascinating about the Chaos Dwarfs in the modern time, so like what they're kind of up to nowadays, is one of their biggest, baddest, most recent inventions that is horrific, but also fascinating and demonstrates their level of science, which is that the Chaos Dwarfs are the only race I know of who have managed to do something that the old ones themselves did not seem able to do, which is that the Chaos Dwarfs figured out how to create life, how to take something that is not alive in any way, doesn't have any form of sentience or sapience, and they made a living entity out of it, which are the Kadaa, which are a very, very unique thing.
The Kadaa.
So for those that don't know, one of the most recent inventions of the Chaos Dwarfs, and by far the scariest fucking thing they've ever invented, because it seems to have kind of almost take what they did to create the Black Orcs, but they said, okay, what if instead of using an orc as a base, we just made it ourselves? What if we took the very fundamental laws of the ether, where supposedly consciousness kind of comes from, we took those basic building blocks and we made something from scratch, which is insane. It's insane. And they did it. They successfully pulled it off. They even build the Kadaa with self-destruct sequences functionally. When a Kadaa is activated, so a Kadaa, if you look at it when it's inert, it literally just looks like an empty suit of armor. Like it's just a couple of pieces of armor with runic script. Then they strike, I think it's called like the rune of burning or the rune of hate or something, but they strike a certain rune on it that activates them and it brings them to life. And they are literally creatures made out of pure fire. They're not demons. They're similar to demons, but they're not. They are genuinely created life forms that are magical in nature, but they are designed with a nature where they burn themselves out. They burn so hot that they burn through the very wards that, or the very runic script that brings them life, and kill themselves. Like that way they can't turn against the Chaos Dwarfs, because even if they do, they're going to die anyway, which is like a really fucked up form of life to create where it's like built in with a, for lack of a better term, like a suicide timer, that they can't help it. Like the Kadaa, they only know anger, like, because they're kind of just Axian spirits in a sense.
I mean, I'd add a bit of metal to that as well, since they're made of material metal. But they're metal and fire
creatures.
They're terrifying creatures. Like they're half demonic, but they're only half demonic because they're taking spiritual energy from the aether, which is where all demons come from. So it's arguably not demonic at all.
Yeah.
It's just empowered by the aether. It's a terrifying creature of rage and hatred and fire. Very Chaos Dwarf and very Hashut. And again, these sort of experiments that are coming from their sorcerer prophets or their sorcerer scientists or their sorcerer whatevers really do speak to what the good old Father of Darkness Hashut is up to. What are they trying to make? What are they trying to do? And this one speaks quite well to, perhaps they're trying to manifest Hashut in some fashion, trying to manifest immaterial things into the material. It's a fun one, the good old Kadaa. They're a thing.
I didn't used to consider this as much, but now I'm kind of considering more as we had this conversation of the idea that Hashut really seems like more of a demon prince type entity, because he has such a fundamental understanding of both the material plane and the etheric plane, which is very unusual. That's odd. Most creatures don't have a good understanding of both, but he seems to understand like generally the nittiest, grittiest little specifics of how to manipulate material stuff like the lava and the deep earth, and how to mine and do all this other weird stuff, genealogy, and like how to manipulate the very fundamental aspects of life. But he also understands how to manipulate the ether on such a fundamental way. I mean, they can make their own creatures.
Yeah, I mean, like the Kadaa themselves. I mean, much of what makes them what they are is all the sacrifice that's involved, causing those spirits to burn into the aether. That immaterial stuff can then be pulled right back in again into the metallic bodies. There is an understanding of the fundamental nature of the aether in the material realm, which really is intrinsically understood by the Chaos Dwarves, because that is the direction they've been pushed in by Hashut. The Hashut wants them to be doing this, and I agree, it does speak to demon princedom. But I think I'll add one extra part to that, because particularly for old school Warhammer fans, the ideal of a demon prince being in any way powerful beyond just being a handy little creature that you drop on your battlefield is it's a bit surprising sometimes, but I think it's worth making this clear. A demon prince is nothing more than a mortal that has ascended and become a god. Now, I know that that's relatively controversial in terms because it's a demon prince. I mean, that's not a god, is it? No, it is. It absolutely is. It's now gained immortality, often granted by one of the chaos gods, although there are other ways to become a chaos demon prince. You have ascended and you maintain the mind that you had before. So the Hashut that gathers around you stays there permanently. Indeed, arguably all the winds that are comprised of your material form are given extended life on the other side. And you can manifest in reality if you're summoned like any other demon, but they understand the material realm in a way that others don't. They make the perfect generals, for example, for the Chaos hosts, because they understand the material realm in a way that others don't. We have ourselves our first demon prince, Be'lakor, that we're all aware of, who was brought into godhood either by one or all of the Chaos powers. There's different stories. Or by himself. And he effectively is a god who has been massively cursed and held in place by the other Chaos gods so that he doesn't rise up and take control and overrule them in a variety of ways. Be'lakor is properly screwed by them and indeed cursed to crown their alternative to him. As in, they are the demon prince that should be ruling. No, you're going to have to do the Everchosen because we're going down that route now because our first attempts with the demon princes, whoa, bad. That turned out really bad. But we've got entities from the first cataclysm, great demons who were originally mortal, which again perhaps gives you the idea that perhaps Hashut is a dwarf. There's nothing wrong with saying that any one of the mortal species would have been the source of this. Be'lakor almost certainly was an elf. Almost certainly. I mean, even his name, Be'lakor, Belkahadris is here, Bel this, Bel that. It's a classic piece of elven wordage. Be'lakor was probably an elf. And look at what he's become. Maybe a human, maybe something else. Doesn't really matter what he was. But Hashut is so intrinsically dwarfy in terms of everything that he's doing. If you're looking to make him a demon prince and looking to make him effectively a god, he's an ancestor god who went, fuck this. I should be on the other side, and I'm going to be. And they're all building industrialized towards a particular end because of this ancestor. That'd be one way of looking at it.
Yeah, I would like if someone, which I know Cubicle 7's working on it, of like an expanded dwarf thing, because the dwarves have not gotten like a really good RPG focus since first edition. But like if they were gonna reinterpret the Epic of Skavor, leaving some threads that Skavor might have become Hashut would be that would be so much better than what the original story does with him.
I completely agree. And so I would be sorely tempted to do that.
I have a thought for you after
Before
this.
you do it, let's bring up Godzilla there. You know, this stream makes me wish Chaos Dwarfs got more attention and fleshed out, or potentially got a roleplay book one day. You know what? I agree completely. I loved the Chaos Dwarfs when they very first came out. They were roundly hated, though, because they were seen to be very cartoony. They were with their giant hats and, oh, here comes the missile launchers with a big missile on his hat. And many thought that looked a bit daft. And there was some people who really steered into Warhammer being serious stuff. So they didn't like them while simultaneously liking greenskins. They were never that popular. And because of that, they faded away after 5th edition and then just vanished. And everyone tried to pretend they didn't exist until they got their rewrite with Tamarkan. And I find it fascinating that when they got completely updated again for Total War, that they basically took everything that was originally there and mashed it into what came out from Forge World, rather than
cult classic. They literally turned into the it is the most classic version of what a cult classic is the Chaos Dwarfs.
And I love them, and I'm really looking forward to playing about with them because I just think as a faction that they're absolutely great, and it is a shame that they never got the same time. And because I don't want to, I mean, I'm going to anyway. I hate ranting about the same thing again and again. But whoever was responsible for all of the end time stuff, if they just sat down and looked at each faction, all of them, and said, how can I make this end awesome? How can I make the Chaos Dwarves end awesome? Rather than just Chaos Dwarves, fuck, we should do something with them. Let's footnote it and say they were headbutted. Job done.
Yeah. Someone wants to give us like $100,000 each. We'll sit down and do our own fan version of the End Times for you.
Holy shit! Yeah,
100 grand each.
Yeah, that'd pay for my time for a year.
Yeah. Look what Be'lakor forget a heavy metal band. Yes, I do love that Be'lakor has gone on to inspire that.
That amuses me no end.
Millions of people who only eat mushrooms, meat, and beer made out of blood. Imagine the flatulence the ass cannon life. Funny enough, the hell cannon that a lot of people know and love, the hell cannon is literally just the ass cannon updated to make it more serious.
Yeah, it pretty much is. But I do love those updates. Hey, Laughing God, to add to that comment, this stream makes me want so many things to be expanded on in the roleplay. Yeah, well, that was my plan back in the day, but
that's why I watch LAWhammer.
So well done, reigniting my love of the lore time and time again. Delighted to help you with that because I also adore the lore. I particularly love the weird cul-de-sacs that we get into as we discuss it out, and we suddenly realize, wait a minute, Hashut! He should be a dwarf.
I have a brain thing for you here in a second. Song of Power. Hashut is just Vashtor. I think you mean Vashtor is just Hashut, but yes. I actually think there's a lot of fun behind the idea that Hashut might have an interesting relationship with the Forge of Souls, and that Hashut has stolen things from it that are not supposed to be known to mortals, but he figured them out. Because do you ever think about where a Demon Prince has to be made? So Andy, I just had a thought as far as Zharr-Naggrund, based on something you said earlier and other people said earlier, where we've kind of talked about like it being a prison and like Hashut trying to manifest. What I'm kind of thinking is if Hashut is a demon prince who was a dwarf, and Hashut we know is very materialist. He is obsessed with the material plane. He's not trying to destroy it. He's a god of tyranny. He wants to control it.
Yep, that seems fair.
That means he is objectively not on the same page as the four greater powers.
Correct.
Break it.
He would see the four chaos powers with nothing more than contempt.
So what if the idea for why it's so ridiculous, why it's so over the top, and he's doing nonstop prep for thousands of years is because he wants to trap the four dark brothers and mingle Zharr-Naggrund?
Now that seems entirely likely. The ridiculous nature of that, although I take exception in calling them all brothers.
Well, it's just one of the classic names. They're not brothers.
I just refuse to use that name.
I know, but it's there. It's an old term.
Yeah, but beyond me being picky as all hells, I think that would answer to the sort of overarching tyrannical controlling nature of slavery. Looking at, say, for example, enslaving the four chaos powers to his yoke. Absolutely. That seems completely in character and would also speak to why Hashut could potentially win the dwarves over. Look at what they're doing to us. This is how we can take our own back. But it's going to cost you. But we will bring them under our yoke. Those who are about to destroy you, we will bring them under our yoke. I could see some of them eventually maybe even going, you know what? You're my ancestor. Yeah, okay. But we're going to have to take on magic. We're going to have to effectively change. They might even see themselves as the heroes of the piece. They're enslaving greenskins mostly. I mean, that's a good thing to do, right?
Yeah, I actually really fucking love the idea, though, of like Hashut. Like, everyone loves fucking, what's his face? The god that doesn't get to show up anymore because of copyright stuff. Bilal, of Hashut kind of having that thing of the anti-chaos force, not because he's anti-chaos, but because he's just so dominant.
Yeah, I'm quite willing to trade with them and take all their stuff because what he's doing is testing their weapons out in their battlefields to effectively later bring them down completely. I love that. Using them against themselves.
Yeah,
that's a lovely card.
I've always loved the thread of like Slaanesh is not as on the same page as the other three are when it comes to destroying the world, because Slaanesh is like, but I like all the sensations and excess. Like, I like this stuff. I want things to continue. But for Hashut, he would be completely against the end times. There's no way he would be on the same team.
Given the character of the god as it's been presented, the end times do not look like an intelligent outcome for that god. You can see why you'd sideline it if you were trying to say that all chaos was on the same side. Got a nice comment there from Avinius. Just an idea. I do love an idea. What if Hashut is a dwarf ancestor who tried to challenge the Old Ones and was imprisoned below Earth as a punishment? Would explain his obsession with technology and sci-fi aspect. I would only argue against that with one thing, which is if the Old Ones wanted to stop you, they wouldn't bother imprisoning you. Squish.
Yeah, squish.
Squish. That they've got no reason to keep you alive. And one of the biggest storytelling problems I have with many of these plots, as they're often used by writers, is that the second you look at the motivations of the people involved, you go, wait a minute, that makes no sense. It's a cool story, and this would be a cool story. A dwarf ancestor that was imprisoned underneath and was whispering up or whatever. Cool story in there, but I would really look to try and tweak those motivations as to how it came about a little bit, because that's not.
Yeah, and I would also recommend, because the Old Ones are such an ancient, unknowable alien force, I'm always really strongly trying to advise people to try and use them as little as possible, because they can steal a lot of the really interesting narrative and like personal motivations away from someone. Because when you introduce the Old Ones, you're introducing a, by definition, unknowable force into the equation, which it can be fun, but generally speaking, I think it's far more interesting to have Hashut as an entity who fell on his own for reasons that we've kind of postulated about, and exploring those as opposed to it being another Old One's MacGuffin, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in the end, you're wanting to tell interesting, unique stories. And the Old Ones already have a massively awesome, unique story. And their story is that they're unknown. So the more that they do, the less that their motivations become clear. So you really want them to do as little as possible. You want them to be that mysterious force that sits in the background attempting to bioengineer the world with a tide of lizardmen for whatever reason they were doing it for. And you don't want anything more than that. We've got enough. Where the Chaos Dwarves don't have enough. I like this one here because
Godzilla asks, so the fact that Chaos Dwarfs have giant train mortars from World War II, and they specifically use pressurized boilers to fire its very specifically made ammunition made by the Sorcerer Prophets, and don't let the details leak of how it's made. Which, for anyone curious, he's talking about the not Doomshrieker rocket,
the other one, Death Strike. No,
Dreadquake, the Dreadquake mortars.
That's it. Thank you.
The Dreadquake mortar shells are one of the most tightly kept secrets for the Chaos Dwarfs, because they literally cause earthquakes when they hit the ground, which is like, think of the munitions that we have. We don't have munitions that we fire that cause fucking earthquakes, and the Chaos Dwarfs do.
Yeah, Chaos Dwarves are proper sci-fi. Hey, Mandatus. I'm still unsure how I want to pronounce that. All right, can't restrain myself anymore. Andy! Will a Chaos Dwarf appear in LAWhammer? Oh, you want to say the next part?
I want to ask it, because it's a good 2GM question of will a Chaos Dwarf appear in LAWhammer? Because I have a bit I want to add at the end. I want to watch Elemenowith, Luitpold, and Elric freak out. Just saying, if you support LAWhammer on Patreon on the highest tier, you can try and force Andy to put certain concepts or characters into the campaign. So if you really want a Chaos Dwarf to show up.
Yeah, that's not untrue. And indeed, we have a couple of interesting characters coming up in Middenheim, actually, which I'm really looking forward to bringing in. The answer to that is, as it currently stands, as in this campaign, no, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. I mean, the Empire is very far away from what is the Chaos Dwarf Heartlands, and it would require a good story reason for that to cross over, but it would be super awesome. Now, that doesn't mean it won't pop up in a flashback or an alternative sighting. For example, one of the things,
Comic-Con invasion.
Exactly. One of the things that I am doing is I'm flashbacking to parts of Alamanowite's life, for example, both before and after she had her mind wipe, which means that we can go thousands of years back at various points and see Rootweaver doing her thing rather than what she is at the moment. So I imagine that one of the or more may pop up at some point. And if you're not watching my show, you should do, because it's a larf.
God, please, it's so good. It's so good.
Maybe the old ones did bury an ancestor god, says JJ Binks, pardon me. But for a purpose, when the world blew up and he was forgotten with bitter because of it, you know, again, the purpose. Burying an old one seems weird. Having one collapsed down, burying an ancestor god, having one collapsed and stuck down there is at least a potential thing. Having it be corrupted is also a potential thing. But I like the idea that it's not so much corrupted as it takes advantage of the world as it currently is and sees a way to bring chaos to its heel.
Yeah, what I will say in regards to that is you could do some interesting things with the idea that there is supposedly a alternate realm called the Glittering Realm, where the ancestor gods learned a lot of their secrets from the old ones that exists somewhere deep beneath Karak-Zorn. You could say, what if there was an alternate entrance somewhere else that did collapse? Or what if you want to get really spicy, what if Grimnir didn't actually go north by himself? What if someone went with him, but that person fell behind or fell and Grimnir didn't help him? And Grimnir went, sorry, I have to keep going.
We know that Grimnir went with his son, at least, because there's a lovely description of Grimnir's first trek up there and him sending people back. So we could have ourselves a whole manner of fun things happen along that. There's a lot there.
But you could, the idea that the idea that Hashut has forced his way or has a way to the Glittering Realm, which is how he knows so much, that could work really well.
That could work really well. It would also explain the odd technological advances that the Chaos Dwarfs have made, particularly with sorcery science, because the old ones were sorcery scientists.
The amount of stuff that's kind of lining up that he is an ancestor god demon prince is like fucking blowing my mind right now.
Yeah, I am 100% behind this idea. So does Hashut have a sacred number like the Dark Four? Not that we have publicly had marked down in any book. The problem with the sacred numbers is that they don't make a great deal of sense. It's super inconsistent. Nurgle, for example, you almost feel like it should be 3.
Yeah. There's no, how do I say this? There is no explanation ever given why some gods have sacred numbers when the vast majority don't. And
it was a part of
you have them. There's no reason why they have them. They're just like, here's a number.
Yeah, totally. But they are super fun to mess around with if you're rolling dice or whatever, because if they pop up, you can use them to persecute your players. So it's just... I would like to take a brief pause, given where we are at the hour, to say you're currently watching this on one of my channels right now. And that being the case, have you pressed subscribe? If you haven't, would you like Hashut to come along and burn your ass? Because he will if you don't click subscribe. Also, given that you are the most awesome of awesome people, do please press like wherever you may be. And if you are watching us later, then do please click like, click subscribe, and then immediately when you're done, go and find Loremasters of Sotek channel. And
also leave us a comment. Algorithm gods, leave us a comment.
Oh, comments. Oh, yeah. Do drop us a comment. Say something like, hey, love your beards. Okay, that's a shit comment.
Broke my ego.
So yes, if all of you did it, we would have a whole bunch more subscriptions.
Yeah, and then I could hurry up and release tweets.
So if you didn't know already, when we hit 5K subscribers over here on the LAWhammer channels on YouTube, so if you're currently watching on Twitch, do pop over to YouTube, press subscribe, and go back to Twitch again. If once we get 5,000, the good old Loremaster of Sotek is going to be doing himself one hell of a video for good old Queek Headtaker, and that Queek Headtaker video will even include a little cameo by myself, squeaking like a mad Skaven.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not going to reveal anything else.
Nope.
We're almost there too. It's only like 1.3k left. Okay, Morning. If Hashut was an ancestor god who became a demon prince, would that mean the Chaos Dwarfs are still following Dawi ancestor worship?
Yes.
Technically, yes.
And that is something I think is an essential component of trying to make sense of why the dwarves would fall. You need to have a reason, and there never was one given. It was just, oh, they were surrounded by chaos. A god said, hey, I'll help. And they went, okay. And suddenly we're bull people now. What?
What's happening?
That sounds like bull to me. Really?
Also, would Chaos Dwarfs survive in 40k? So whenever you're trying to jump from 40k to fantasy, the general answer is yes. Because a lot of fun fact, most of the fantasy factions were in 40k originally, back in like the Rogue Trader days. And then they got shuffled out as 40k stopped being fantasy 40,000 years in the future and started being our world 40,000 years in the future. But like the Chaos Dwarfs would do very, very, very well. Very well for themselves. Because they're kind of like they're just good at that kind of thing. But most of the fantasy races would honestly adapt just fine. Because you would just change their magic to psychic powers.
I'm just picking this one up from Raziel because it makes me laugh.
I know Andy's poor microphone is trying so hard. All right, we gotta get into questions.
Yeah, we must have a bunch. Yes, I'm ready. Oh, we try and do these quickly, given that we've already hit 20 past.
Yes. Okay, Sir Beardington. Mordheim stream stated Be'lakor was the 5th most powerful of the Chaos divinities. In your opinion, where do you think Hashut ranks on that list?
I think arguably about the same. And I think this is one of the great mistakes of Warhammer, is to elevate the Chaos Gods to such an extent that they are effectively inevitable, that every god is effectively chaos, which is one reading, that all the horned rats are, that's just Nurgle, isn't it? Or Hashut, that's just Khorne but doing magic. No, that doesn't make sense. Let's not look at it too closely. It's bullshit. It makes the Warhammer world less interesting and less fascinating. All of these other gods, all of these other factions deserve to have their own unique expressions. Not to allow them to have so is an absolute waste of really cool lore. So loosely speaking, I would say not only, yes, they're about the same, I would argue that in some circumstances, they're much more powerful because it's not black and white. It's not. They've got a number from 1 to 100 to show how powerful they are. If you do that, then you just say, yeah, Khorne's the most powerful. Is he? Well, yeah, he's got the bigger number. But bullshit. They all have different levels of power in different environments. And from as we've seen throughout the course of this stream, the Chaos Dwarves are much more material. They're much more in the real world, which would suggest that as a god, Hashut is much more powerful in the real world than the other gods are, meaning that in the great beyond of the Aether, perhaps super powerful, but if they came through here, Hashut would hand them their ass. Perhaps that's Hashut's great plan. We've discussed many different great plans that could be here. Loosely speaking, I wouldn't like to say one is more or less powerful than any other. I would simply like to say it's a big fuck off chaos god, and you should be scared.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Andy that power scaling is such a nebulous fucking mess, because how you define power completely matters, and it's a fucking mess until you do that. Because like Andy said, if you're having a punch out, yeah, no, Khorne's gonna murder everybody. If you're having who's the most clever and insidious, well, Tzeentch would probably take over there. Who's the most resilient? Well, it's gonna be Nurgle. But like, if you're going who has the most influence in the material realm, well, it's Hashut by far. Like he doesn't, like, he kind of breaks a lot of the rules that we understand. So it just depends. But yeah, he's up there. Aside from the Kadaa, what would the demons of Hashut look like? Bulls.
It's a load of bull, isn't it?
Yeah. It's actually very heavily believed by the Chaos Dwarfs that the Taurus are in fact the Bale Taurus, and the Great Taurus are simply demons of Hashut. Because they are magical entities. Like, they're physical, but they are wreathed in Akshi to kind of an alarming extent. And the Chaos Dwarfs quite literally believe that they're just physical manifestations of Hashut's will.
Yeah, I'd really like a new model for that. Something that was just all fire and smoke.
Wait until you see the Total War versions. They're beautiful. And the Lamassu looks incredible. They actually made the Lamassu look good.
Godzilla adds, since the roleplay books go much deeper than the army books, it makes me wonder, of all the inventions we don't hear about the Chaos Dwarfs make, like a Chaos Dwarf made a Gatling gun that uses fireglaive ammunition, and yes to this. It's one of, I think, the great mistakes of people who look at Warhammer lore, and that's that looking at the army list tells you everything about the species or the faction at hand. It just doesn't. It's basically the tip of the spear, but there's a whole load of shit sitting behind that. So I think the answer to that is yes. Yep. And good one, Godzilla. Pretty much.
Absolutely.
That. Yeah.
Let's see. In the monster, you said ogres make terrible slaves. Does this mean the ogre crews working on Jawizar war machines are hired mercenaries? No, they are actual ogre slaves, but ogres do not make good slaves. The Chaos Dwarfs are keenly aware of that, but the Chaos Dwarfs don't care.
Yeah. I would argue actually the ogres don't necessarily make good slaves, but they do make very good workers. Yeah. And it's just managing those that is hard. And the way that the Chaos Dwarf works which is through tyranny and oppression, does not work very well with the ogres. It's marked in a couple of places that there's only one species that the Chaos Dwarves definitely don't like to enslave and tend to kill or work to death immediately, and that's the Skaven, because they're even more treacherous than the sneaky gits that are the Hobgoblins.
They're usually either an assassin in disguise or they're a clan pestilence plague bomb waiting to happen, which has happened before, which is hilarious. That's why the Chaos Dwarves don't let that shit in.
Quite. They're right to do so.
Yeah, the ogres, they use them where they can, but the thing about ogres is that you have to be constantly watching them. You can't just have an ogre population of slaves. They're gonna rebel and it's gonna be bad because they're big and strong and tough. Now, a single ogre that's being watched over by a work crew who's just loading munitions, they can handle that.
I mean, I would argue they could handle quite a few of them. I mean, try not to. You got to remember that they are like 12-foot tall living machines of death. But nevertheless, they are still quite biddable. If you keep on feeding them, they're quite happy. They tend to mix in with every society they get into, and several of them have probably got themselves in as slave masters and all manner of different
They just, I think it's
within.
just they don't make good basic bitch slaves.
Totally.
They're too rebellious, and the other thing is they take a lot of food to keep going. Like ogres are hungry, and if you don't feed them, they will starve to death. Like that can happen.
Bang, 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 hot, hot. Jack!
Yeah, that wraps it up. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
If you're playing Total War, the Tower of a Share was literally built just to deal with ogres and Chaos Dwarfs.
Chaos Dwarfs are a pain in the fucking ass. Fortunately, though, they're not really expanding.
Do the Dawizar have beastman slaves? Probably some.
Not many.
The Darklands
just
are not
that
very
many
for beastmen.
You got to remember that beastmen are largely the children of the forest, children of chaos that live in all the forests and hide there. They're not known for their plains dwelling ways. It's not RuneQuest where you've got brew everywhere. So yeah, they, loosely speaking, will they enslave them? Yes, they don't care. They'll
there's
take
a really
anyone
awesome map that shows like the beastman population across the world, and it kind of shows it like a cancer almost. And the Darklands and the Badlands are mostly empty because there's not a lot of forests. Let's see.
Nice one. I like that one.
Yeah. What prominent examples of Dawizar war gear are in the setting, not counting war machines? The big ones are black shard armor, I think it's called, which is like a type of scale mail, but it's made out of like a really, really nice form of material. It's not Gromroll. It's similar to, because the Chaos Dwarfs don't actually have easy access to Gromroll, which is interesting because they're not like in the deep mountains and stuff. But they do have access to a lot of other materials that they make to a similar level of hardness through their engineering. But they have that skill shard armor, and then fire glaives are their other like really famous form of technology, which are rifles that shoot like, I don't even know what to describe them as. They're like bullets of fiery death. Like they're way scarier than regular bullets.
Yeah, basically, let's sum it up as a whole rather than look at specifics. They are known for melding metal and tech with magic and sorcery, particularly with a stress on demons. Now add fire, and we start getting all manner of different items. There's lots of rockets, there's lots of shells, there's lots of things that actually feel very World War One. Big, huge mortar landing in and shaking everything, giving everyone shell shock and it all being horrible. Fire spurting out of the ground, because that happened in World War One, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, look at them as being technologically much further ahead than others, and try not to get too caught up on just what you see on the models or on their forces being presented.
Yep. Oh, this one's kind of interesting. Who would be Hashut's main rival amongst the ruinous powers? If you count him as a ruinous power, which I do, I don't know if Andy does, but I would actually say the Great Horned Rat. I think the two of them stand very interestingly opposed, as the Great Horned Rat is the great inheritor and a god of ruination, whereas Hashut is more of like, Hashut builds his own stuff. He makes his own things. He builds an empire and he wants to make things. Whereas the Great Horned Rat is more about just fucking boiling everything down to slop and just taking everything from everyone without making anything himself.
Yeah, so if you take a look at the key character traits, the key character traits are hatred, dominance, artifice, hatred, tyranny, control. So we've got that on one side. So we've got a very angry type of god here who is bitter and very dwarfy in many respects because he's been wronged. That's what it feels like. A bull-headed god who is stubborn and stuck in his ways and absolutely convinced that he knows the right of it. So doesn't like anybody standing against him at all. So loosely, the answer is every fucker.
Yeah, that's fair. Though what's interesting is most people probably wouldn't think it, but I actually do think the servants of Slaanesh and Hashut might occasionally see eye to eye on occasional things.
Yeah.
Of that. They're both gods of greed. They're both that bull symbology, though for different reasons.
I would actually have, because that also comes with indolence, and that would be so against the artifice and control.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I would be very, if I was, for example, creating myself let's say a mining outpost with a couple of 100 Chaos Dwarves in it, maybe a couple of 1,000 slaves from various species. I would take all of that and I would try to, as is always the case with Chaos, insidiously try to get at least 1 or 2 cults in there. The most obvious and easy one to get in there would be Slaanesh, which in some respects makes you immediately go, well, perhaps Slaanesh is more of an enemy than you first realize.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, of a different kind. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there special enchantments and runes built into the city of Zharr-Naggrund itself? Oh, absolutely. Ain't no way. Ain't no way they wouldn't.
Yeah,
everywhere.
I mean, the cuneiform script that they'll have will be all over the place. Hey, Godzilla. I think the Chaos Dwarf trailer, concept designs, and art from Total War and CA shows a lot of good representation of how the race looks, functions, desires, and goals. And yes, I agree. I've watched it and I liked it, although I can't recall it because I only watched it once. So I'm going to probably go and watch it again. But I should do, once I've got myself all set up, I should just do a reaction video for every fucking CA video and just go through them all.
I think we could do a sit down and kind of chat our way through them. I think that would, people would love to watch that.
Yeah, that'd be super fun.
Considering how popular those kinds of videos are, I think people would love that. But no, so I think CA, like, of all the, I mean, they've had a very good track record at like getting a good grip on each of the races, but the Chaos Dwarfs was definitely very pleasant. I think it was a nice surprise for everyone because it wasn't just one iteration of the Chaos Dwarfs. They kind of took all the different versions and sort of fit them together into something.
Although I will say again, just because I can't help myself, don't like using the word race for another species.
Faction.
Because, or a faction. A faction's good. I don't like using the word race because race is a race of the same species and it's not a human part of the human race.
I know, but they call them race packs. It's dumb,
I know they do, but that doesn't mean I have to do it. I'm better than them, god damn it.
On the same page. All right. Great Fate. Since there are much fewer dwarf women, generally it's safe to assume there are significantly fewer Chaos Dwarf women. Not necessarily.
I don't think that's safe to assume. Indeed, I think that could be one of the things that makes the Chaos Dwarves stand separate to normal dwarves. And if I was in control right now, I would definitely write that in.
So there are,
because it makes sense.
Yeah, there are 2 really interesting things that are brought up about the Chaos Dwarfs in regards to their women, which the last part of this is how are they treating Zharr-Naggrund and Chaos Dwarf society as a whole. The Chaos Dwarfs have held onto a lot of the dwarf ideas about women, and that it's a mostly patriarchal society. If anything, it's even more patriarchal than the original dwarfs are. But the women are their wrens are treated very well, or they're called dames. The dames are treated quite well and can have a lot of authority, though they cannot be sorcerer prophets for some reason. There is like an explicit note about that. But what's interesting is that the Chaos Dwarfs do note that their women do wield a lot of political authority and a lot of political power, though they are protected within, like, the Chaos Dwarfs don't like to risk them going out and fighting. But the notes about them that are really interesting is that there's notes that the Chaos Dwarfs genetically tamper with babies in the womb, because the Chaos Dwarfs do that to create more bull centaurs, because bull centaurs don't occur very often naturally. So the Chaos Dwarfs are constantly tinkering them with them in the womb, or sometimes when children are born, they graft their bodies using sorcery to make them into bull centaurs, which is horrific, but it works, and they're careful not to kill them. Like, the Chaos Dwarfs are careful with their young, but they use what humans would consider absolutely abominable techniques to get to where they're going. Though there have been different interpretations. There is one writer, the writer of the Wulfric novel, whose name I cannot recall off the top of my head, but he took an interesting view on Chaos Dwarfs and leaned really hard into the patriarchal aspect, where in his book he introduced the concept of Harridans. And in his book, he writes that Harridans are Chaos Dwarf women who are past the age where they can still give birth. So they are no longer useful to the Chaos Dwarfs, and they become guardians of the Sorcerer Prophets, which means, if anything, they're like considered at the same tier as Bull Centaurs because they're allowed to be the personal guards of the Sorcerer Prophets, who are literally the big dogs. But the way
I hate the inherent sexism that's constantly written into this shit.
But it doesn't really make a lot of sense because there's nothing about Hashut that would inherently lean him to be patriarchal.
Exactly. Particularly given the importance of dwarf women.
Yeah, if anything, he would probably be the opposite. Because the thing about Hashut you have to remember is he's supposed to be the dwarfs without restrictions. He's supposed to be dwarfs with everything, all the reins ripped off the side and just cut loose. If anything, he would really pressure the Chaos Dwarfs to use their sorcery to make them a 50-50 race and to do everything as possible to increase their population using sorcery, to make more Bull Centaurs using sorcery. And if anything, you probably wouldn't be able to tell a lot of the time what you're fighting because a lot of the Chaos Dwarfs wear like full masks and all this other stuff. I'm okay with the concept of Harridans, but like it would probably be more like a specific cult within the group.
Yeah, that I like
the wives of Hashut kind of concept.
Yeah,
who protect the Sorcerer Prophets for a religious reason, not because it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I love gendering stuff for certain cultures because it's what happens in the real world. Things are gendered all the time, and I have no particular issue with that. So gendering off, for example, the sorcerers, or gendering off hag queens, or ice witches, or whatever. That all those things are fine. But purposely building in a restriction that feels like you're just trying to bring real world mores down on a fantasy realm that doesn't have the same weirdness attached to it. It just seems weird. Anyway, let's pass on.
Well, the last thing I'll say real quick about that is don't fall into the trap a lot of people fall into where you say, oh, I don't see a model of this, therefore it's men only. You have to remember the modelers, they're trying to save money. They're not going to make
every time
the same model because for them, it's just a waste of money. Unless there's a really good reason they need to do it, they're only going to print one sculpt. So don't look at like Sorcerer Prophets and go, oh, well, there's only dudes, so clearly it's dudes only. No, they want to save money and they just didn't want to bother with it.
Yeah, totally. So Cole says, are there any Hashuti humans like in Age of Sigmar? Do some hobgoblins worship Hashut? One last random question, but have you all seen Troll Feet Walker's Hashut art? So I haven't seen the last one. Are there any Hashuti humans and do hobgoblins worship? They are a deeply religious society. So you've got two answers to this question. Either the Chaos Dwarves deeply keep it to themselves and they tell everyone no, or more realistically, everyone is forced to worship Hashut.
Yeah, most evidence seems to be that the hobgoblins that live among the I sent you the image on Discord if you want to look at it. It's a very pretty image.
Oh, look at that!
Yeah, representation of Hashut by an artist. But
interesting.
Yeah, it's cool.
I'm not against that.
Yeah, it kind of takes the Lamassu concept and just runs with it.
Yep, it does.
But
got a Sumerian feel.
Yeah, hobgoblins definitely worship Hashut if they're within the Chaos Dwarf culture because the Chaos Dwarfs do not seem to want them worshiping like Gork or Mork. They want them to fear Hashut.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But humans, maybe. I don't know. Humans are weird. Humans will worship anything.
Yeah, pretty much.
Let's see. Okay, skipping along here. What are the major imports and exports of Zharr-Naggrund? Major import is slaves and certain minerals and gems and stuff. Export is weapons.
And almost certainly consumables. Let's just say consumables just in general because they're going to need to eat.
Yeah. Sir Beardington does. Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. Does Zharr-Naggrund deal in Warpstone? Yes, not as much. Chaos Dwarfs have an interesting relationship with Warpstone. It's noted in the Tarmacon book that they do use it, but they use it for very specific things, unlike the Skaven, who put that shit on everything. The Chaos Dwarf, Skaven treat Warpstone like ketchup. Chaos Dwarfs treat it like an actual irradiated, dangerous material.
Yeah, the Chaos Dwarves are like scientists with it. They use it for what it should be used for as far as they're concerned. Unlike the Skaven, who will use it and its magical effects for literally fucking everything.
Yeah, they'll even eat it because they're fucking fuckers. Or snort it if you're good old thankful. So how does Zharr-Naggrund's economy stack up against major other industrial cities?
I find that a fascinating question because it speaks to a capitalist view of how every city works, and capitalism is only a more recent invention as far as we understand it in comparison to what has existed in the past. They don't really, strictly speaking, as we understand it, have an economy. It's not like they've got themselves gold crowns that they're passing around and buying shit with. It's not like they're printing notes to represent various types of stuff that they have. They're working largely on a barter system and barter, conquer, and take. All of the resources that are around are owned by all the Chaos Dwarves, but it's also worth noting that the Chaos Dwarves don't have a form of government, even as we understand it. At the very top, they've got all their priests, and they don't have a hierarchy beyond age. So age provides a certain level of respect, but it doesn't mean that they will listen to you. They've got an enormous chunk of sort of like a few hundred of them who are basically all in control, with a whole bunch of other lords and types doing various other stuff.
There is a council of the Sorcerer Prophets, but the positioning is complicated because it's like it's age plus or minus your level of power. But there's a structure to it, but it's very poorly explained. It exists, but that's about we really don't know much about it.
It's basically a giant council where biggest voice wins. And that's pretty much how it's been laid out. That biggest voice will often be the quieter voice because it happens to be someone who has a lot of inherent power. So they may be able to sway the council, but that doesn't mean they will sway the council because they don't actually have the job of king, for example. I find it super fascinating that there is no king. There is no queen. There is no one marked out as being their leader. The Chaos Dwarf that we turn to and is in command of the lot, they don't have that. You could say it's been delegated to Hashut, perhaps.
Yeah, there's actually like Ashtragoth Ironhand is not considered the high priest of Hashut. He's just the most powerful of the priests of Hashut, but it's because he has a coalition. He literally has a bunch of other sorcerer prophets that like agree with him, and he control. The cool thing about the sorcerer prophets is the way they divvy up their power is that they do divvy up as far as if you're the more powerful you are, the more you control within the city. Like you're given certain foundry, you're responsible for more things, but that means you also get to control what goes out of them, which can give you a lot of sway in negotiations. The way they handle power is very interesting because their political makeup is almost more about what districts you control. And as your favor goes up and down, you lose or gain more districts.
And in many respects, you'll lose or gain more districts as well, just by force, because they are tyrannical by nature. And what you can take, whatever you can take is yours.
Oh yes, the Stone Sorcerers. So a cool little thing about we mentioned this earlier, but need to talk about it a little bit more. Is that Chaos Dwarfs, like we said, when any dwarf uses magic, they can turn to stone. They can, and its magic runs wild through them. It's if they lose control of their sorcery, they will turn to stone. Like if a Chaos Sorcerer Prophet is doing his job well, or a Demon Smith, and they don't fuck up, they're not going to turn to stone. But as they use more and more magic, especially if they're creating bigger and bigger things, like take the big Kadaa, the Kadaa Destroyer, for instance. A lot of Chaos Sorcerer Prophets do not survive the experience of trying to create one because it requires so much magic channeling through your body that it's easy to accidentally slip and lose control. And what's interesting is we actually have a very good explanation of what it's like for the Sorcerer Prophets, in that when they lose control of their magic, it will kind of like funnel out through a part of their body. So like it might burst out through their hand or go through their lungs or their intestines or their foot. And wherever it kind of exits out their body, like a lightning strike seeking the nearest route to a particular location, that part of them turns to stone. So Ashtragoth Ironhand has gotten relatively lucky in that only his hands and his lower body have turned to stone over the thousands of years he's been around. But some Chaos Sorcerer Prophets get really unlucky and their heart turns to stone the first time and they die.
Although it is worth adding that originally it was feet up.
Yeah.
Until it was just a head that was left. and those heads could speak and provide prophecy, and could also provide lore because they were considered to be ancients. And up in the temple up at the top, there was said to be a bunch of heads that were fed, which amused me no end. This is an idea.
I actually love that idea so much.
Just the idea that it's gone a little bit Futurama.
Walk
with a
into
whole
the
bunch
room,
of
you have all these
totally.
ancient old sorcerer prophets yelling at you that they haven't been fed today.
I'm bloody hungry. I think that's hilarious. And that was the general idea. Astrogoth, for example, who was almost entirely taken from bottom up. And I like that. It's not a bad idea. And the top of the temple also filled with many stone statues, a little bit similar to the old elder ones over in 40k. Where they all turn crystal.
It's gotten bad enough that now the path from the gates of Zharr all the way to Zharr-Naggrund has Chaos Sorcerer statues along the path, and all of them were once real. And the super scary part is, even if their hearts turns to stone, which will kill them, some of them, everything but their heart and their brain is turned to stone. So they're still alive. They're just
still in there,
stuck forever.
One of the great joys of being a sorcerer is that you're constantly channeling magic through your etheric flows, and that includes Gyron, the Jade Wind of Magic, which can keep you alive indefinitely if you've got enough of it running through you, which is not a really good way to go.
There's a horrific example of it in LAWhammer at the end of Death on the Reich.
I've forgotten about that completely. There you go. Yeah, there is. Nasty.
Okay, moving along here. We already talked about agriculture. It's likely a meat-based industry, but who knows? They might have found a way to make like beautiful gardens at the top that have just never been mentioned, or maybe they take volcanic ash and they have, like wine or vineyards that somehow survive.
There is a need to explain what the bottom of the food chain is, and currently that's not been done with any detail, so we're left making it up.
Yep. Use your imagination. How fortified is Zharr-Naggrund? Extremely. That thing is bristling with weapons.
Yeah, and given that, I reckon it's possibly one of the most well-fortified places in the entire Warhammer world. I think it's horrifically well defended, to the point that people would be surprised at how well defended it is. Not only are you dealing with a location that has an entire fleet sitting inside it, all of which is bristling with weapons, you've got more demonic weapons sitting here being made and popped up on walls than anywhere else in the world. We have got ourselves several hundred sorcerers who are always here. Always. Several hundred of them. And that is more than most places can quickly draw upon for just being there. And these are not short-lived human sorcerers who've been training for the last 30 years. Most of them are several centuries old. Most of them have been practicing their magic for longer than any human will ever practice it. So, yeah, it's not good.
Yeah.
Don't attack it.
Yeah, no. And there are very few places that I think would be more heavily defended, and none of those, like, I could maybe see the argument that Kadaa Constructs, because it is in a mountain, which helps provide a lot of additional protection, but not much else. Not much else. Were there any successful invasions? The slave rebellions, and if you count the end times, Grimgor's final Wa. Let's see. Skipping around all this, but for those that want to know about it, like, it's a very short note. It's not even in the big books. It's only in one of the little black library novels. It literally just says Grimgor showed up with like the biggest Wa ever seen, somehow after he had beaten the ogres, so like he looped around. But so at this point you're dealing with Grimgor, the incarnate of Gur. So he's got the wind of Gur in him, and it's his beast Wa, which is all the greenskins combined with all the ogres after he's already wiped out Grand Cathay. And he gets there, lays siege, and the Chaos Dwarfs are actually keeping him out. And then of all the characters, this makes me laugh so much when I think about it. Of all the characters that spell doom for the Chaos Dwarfs, it's fucking Goldcrag Maneater. Goldcrag Maneater pulls a Mission Impossible and somehow, some way sneaks into Zharr-Naggrund and opens the outer gate from the inside, and the Chaos and all the greenskins pour in. Which is really funny, but
It's a giant waste.
Yeah.
In the same way that
joke,
Cafe was a waste. In the same way that the Ogre Kingdoms was a waste. There was some exceedingly cool stories to tell there, and all of them were skipped over in a paragraph.
What is a milliner? Does that make it?
Milliner?
You know what a milliner is?
A hat maker.
Okay. So are milliners highly respected in the upper echelons of Zharr-Naggrund? I would assume so.
I would say they're the most important people.
Yeah, apparently they're very important for the Chaos Dwarfs.
Hey, Doom Rider, Zharr-Naggrund has Big Fortress from Wizards vibes. Yeah. I mean, that's not unfair. Thanks, Doom Rider. It's a scary place, but yeah.
Between Uzkalak and Zharr-Naggrund, which city is more significant from a religious perspective to the Zdawi Zar? So Uzkalak is very weird because it's kind of like it has a city built on top of it that the Chaos Dwarfs maintain, but it's literally described as a glorified garrison protecting the ancient hold of Uzkalak, which the Chaos Dwarfs do not go into under any circumstances. In fact, the worst punishment that could possibly be given down to a Chaos Dwarf is being thrown into Uzkalak with the door shut behind him.
Bye.
Which the book specifically brings up for how horrifically inventive the Chaos Dwarfs are, speaks to what nightmarish thing must be down there for that to be the worst possible punishment they can come up with. So,
Zharr-Naggrund is the answer.
Yeah, Zharr-Naggrund is definitely the most important religious site. There's something in Uzkalak. Something's going on there. But what? Could be Hashut still down there, like the physical embodiment of Hashut. Who knows? Something's down there. All right. If you got to rewrite what happened to Zharr-Naggrund, the Dawizar Empire to the end times, we would do a lot differently. I don't think we had enough time to go over what we would do differently. Plus, we probably need to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier in the stream, we could come up with at least 10 stories, all of which would be equally interesting. But in the end, you're not looking for one that's just fun and interesting. You're looking for one that really does epitomize the entirety of what it is to be a Chaos Dwarf. And that requires a little bit of time to try and make sure that you pin down something super, super, uber cool.
They definitely would not die to Grimgor in a footnote, though. I can tell you that much.
I am not against a Black Orc taking down.
Yeah, I just wouldn't have it be a footnote.
But it would not be a footnote. I would not be against that as an idea because it does speak to their own arrogance taking them down. And I'm not that bothered by how it happened. I'm just bothered that it happened without the Chaos Dwarves doing anything. And that sucks.
Yeah. I would have there should have been a point to what they were building up to, like a reveal of what they were building up to. Should have been
something fucking awesome. Yeah. Totally.
Even if it doesn't end up working out for them, we should have at least got to see it.
Yeah.
What's the population estimate? I think we already went over that. Like something like 1 million Chaos Dwarfs.
Yeah, something like that. Although it's fair to say that other sources would suggest there's far, far fewer Chaos Dwarfs, and the population of millions is the slave population only. So it fluctuates according to which bit you read.
Yeah, that's the vast majority of Chaos Dwarfs alive. There's only like few, like maybe tens of thousands outside of there between like the Black Fortress, the Tower of Gorgoth, and Uzkalak. And then their naval fleets.
Yeah, totally. The number of wizards that they have, the few hundred that exist, are a massive minority for the species as a whole. So it's worth noting that they've got hundreds still, and their numbers are all the way up and probably higher than the dwarf Karakankwa, which is kind of crazy.
Is Hashut capable of ascending Chaos Dwarfs to demon princes?
I think that's a wonderful question that I really wish someone had answered. Now, if you go back to the original Realm of Chaos books, the answer is yes, they can ascend. They don't need one of the 4 great powers, which would suggest that, yes, Hashut could do it too.
I bet he could, but I don't think he would suffer a rival.
And I think that is a really good answer to it. I think what I would do if I was writing it would almost come up with a very good reason for why he doesn't, because we don't have lots of Chaos Dwarf demon princes flying about being awesome. Nor do we have long tails of previous sorcerers or priests who have been elevated to his side or something similar, which suggests that they are indeed working towards something to allow it to occur. I would probably go down the more material route and say that he can't, because currently he's more material than he is immaterial.
Yep, that could also be very true. Especially if you run with the idea that he's like literally beneath Uzkalak, so like more of him is in the physical realm than not. then he wouldn't be able to.
I mean, you could even argue that there's none of him in the material realm at all, and he is just an ancestor god that has elevated the demon prince through quite materially. Somewhat more like, if you want to take another example of who did that, Nagash. He elevated his soul significantly, but entirely materially.
Or Grombrindle.
Yeah. Well, slightly different with Grombrindle, but yes, again, Grombrindle. No, in fact, no, Grombrindle, looking at the story, perfect. Yes. Yes, that. Yeah.
Since the furthest east populations are Chaos Dwarfs, well, that's not technically true. There are dwarfs further east than the Chaos Dwarfs in the Mountains of Morn. They never get talked about, but they are there.
They exist, sorta.
Yeah, the Ogre Kingdoms book talks about them a bit, and it shows the fallen holds, but it does heavily imply there are holds that don't show up on the map because they're hidden. Like the dwarfs use runes to hide from the ogres because they've learned the hard way that you can't really just keep the ogres out. You have to hide from them. But I would say it is completely absurd to suggest there's no dwarf hold in the Mountains of Morn.
Yep, me too. 100%.
But does Cathay have a distorted negative opinion of dwarfs? I wouldn't think so. Like they trade with dwarfs.
Yeah.
And dwarfs have appeared in the fleets. Like there have been ships that have made the way to their naval ports because there's entire districts for elves, dwarves, and humans described in oh god, I can't remember what the big port city's called. The really, really big port city.
Yeah, the really big with what's her face over it.
Yes. Yin Yin rules over it. I cannot remember what it's called. Somebody in chat will remember
that one.
I keep thinking Wei Jin, but Wei Jin's the capital. I can't.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. But no, they have plenty of dwarfs. Yeah, Fu Shao. Thank you. Yeah,
Fu Shao. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. This is a really good question. That's really cool. So one of the things that's noted in the Skaven book explicitly that I love is it says that Ikit Claw, who is a lot older than people think he is hundreds of years old.
Ikit Claw's the fucking best. Love him as a character.
So in Ikit Claw's lore, it explicitly states that he studies under the sorcerer prophets of Zharr-Naggrund in Zharr-Naggrund. He gets an apprenticeship with them, which flies in the face of everything else we know about their relationship. So Infiltrator of Troy asks, what do you think Ikit could have possibly offered them in order for him to work out that favor?
So I think that what was offered would have to be enormous and fundamental to who they are. It wouldn't just simply be, here, have some Warpstone, because frankly, the Skaven would not be willing to part the enormous quantity that would be required to get what they want. They'd rather use it for their own purposes. It wouldn't simply be some slaves, because the Chaos Dwarves are more than capable of securing their own. So you're then left with, what do the Chaos Dwarves want? And ultimately, that is sadly where we have to draw the line, because we have an enormous question mark that sits beside Hashut. Who is Hashut? What does Hashut want? We've discovered some of the things that it could be in this stream, and we've discussed them out a little bit, but they're still just, to a degree, speculation. And until you answer that question, you can't strictly answer the question that now lies there, because that's going to be fundamental to understanding it. Say, for example, it's a dwarf, let's say, ancestor god that has achieved demon princehood, and that means they will have a history. It's very possible that Ikit Claw had discovered something from their history and brings it back to them, some ancient artifact from previous era that Ikit has managed to get his hands upon, which could then be traded for something of fundamental value. But it just begs other questions. Why did they see it through? There's something here. There's a story that needs to be told. This is the sort of thing where you'd go, hey, can we just write a quick 7,000 word tale about that? That'd be great. Slap it in a PDF. Job's done. Because there is here, I think, a beautiful story waiting to be told. A really interesting one that has yet to properly have an answer.
Yeah, there's a lot of different directions you could go with it. I don't have any answers for you, but you could go some really interesting ways with it. Did Drazoth bring anything / anyone of note back from his raid into Nuln? If not, what do you two think would be interesting loot for him? So there is a mention in the Tarmakon book that when he leaves Tarmakon's invasion force after they blow up the wrong city, which is hilarious. I love that Tarmakon is beaten by a technicality, if you want to get honest about it. A misunderstanding. But because he thinks he destroys Null, and it actually wasn't Null, and he doesn't figure that out for a little bit, which is so the Chaos Dwarfs leave. But because they were like, hey, we said we'd help you blow up a city, and we did. So fuck you, we're out of here. But he captures a lot of slaves, a lot of people. And he also studies a lot of Empire engineering and technology because the Chaos Dwarfs had not been to the Empire in a really fucking long time, and he was fascinated by what the Empire had come up with. As far as like what would have been the most interesting thing to take back with him, certain individuals, maybe like
engineers. I mean, it's going to be engineers, really, isn't it?
Maybe if you capture one of those Marienburg land ships. They'd probably things there.
A gold wizard would go down relatively well because you've got the combination of engineering and wizardry. Something that would go down. Yeah. So he should have taken Gelt and he should have tortured him for eternity. There's the answer.
Yeah. Let's see. Skipping along here. Do the Chaos Dwarfs see the irony of their greed for mineral wealth costing them their souls? I don't think they would see it that way, especially with how material focused they are. I think they would see they might have a different understanding of the situation.
How exactly is it costing their souls?
I assume he means in the traditional like structure of the ancestor gods and going on to the Hall of your ancestors and stuff like the dwarf afterlife, which the Chaos Dwarfs don't seem nearly as concerned with.
I'm pretty convinced they don't care about that shit. No.
They either are probably convinced it doesn't exist or it's just not worth worrying about. How does Zharr-Naggrund deal with the presence of Clan Rictus? They shoot them. Long and short of it. And also, Crookback Mountain is super fucking far away from Zharr-Naggrund. Like,
really far.
Super fucking far away. Not even close.
Yeah.
But what is Zharr-Naggrund's policy in regards to non-Dawizar settlements like the Sentinels and Pig Barter? Sentinel's not really a city per se. It's more of like a stopping point for a lot of caravans, but it's kind of like it breaks and comes back and breaks and comes back. I imagine they raid them occasionally for slaves and otherwise ignore them.
Yeah, I think that's the case. They have several sources of slaves, and I think that there's going to be quite a lot of trade coming from the greenskins for slaves as well, where they will not get raided if they raid somebody else on their behalf. So basically, they've got people funneling slaves into them, meaning that they don't need to go out and do their raids anywhere near as much as would be the case. A knock-on effect. Got to remember that this plane is full of shit, and there's going to be people in that plane who do not want to piss off the Chaos Dwarfs. So in turn, they will become effectively agents of the Chaos Dwarfs. So yeah.
Yep. Let's see. Is there defense against an ogre invasion? Well, so the ogres have tried to invade the Chaos Dwarfs, and they got the absolute bejesus shot out of them, and they gave up.
Yeah, I mean, why bother? They're small, they're short, they're covered in metal.
It wasn't great eating, and it wasn't worth the hassle. Is the long and short of it.
Yeah, and you get shot at a lot. They're better to trade with than to actually kill.
Yeah, especially when Greasus came to them as like, hey, gold's a good thing. And the Chaos Dwarfs were like, oh, gold is pretty much useless to us. So yeah, here.
Yeah.
Are there any trade routes going to and from Zharr-Naggrund? Yes. There's the trade route. There are the ocean routes that go up and down the River Ruin both ways. And then they also have road routes that go through the gates of Zharr to Tower of Gorgoth.
But it's fair to say that most of their trade is with themselves. Yeah. Their river routes, for example. Or
people come to them. They don't go to anybody else.
Totally. And it's going to be dangerous.
Is Zharr-Naggrund actively found new settlements? Nope. They made some outposts to more securely funnel things to themselves, but everything funnels to Zharr-Naggrund. It is the only city. The other ones are defensive towers or big fancy mines.
Yeah, totally.
Like the Tower of Gorgoth is literally just an overseer tower over a bunch of really important mines. That's literally all it is.
Yeah. I mean, it's got a pretty huge population, but still.
Yeah, it's huge.
But it's there for the resources. It's not there for living.
Yeah, the Chaos Dwarfs do not consider it a city. They consider it an outpost.
Yeah.
Let's see. Why is Zharr-Naggrund the capital, not Uzkalak? Because Hashut told them to.
I think that's probably the best answer.
Let's see. Question specific for Andy about behind the scenes stuff. During your times working on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, was there ever any talks to explore the Darklands or Zharr-Naggrund, a potential expansion or anything involving the Chaos Dwarfs?
No.
Hellfire, how often do slaves manage to escape the Chaos Dwarfs? Very rarely.
I would.
Very,
I
very
counteract and say quite commonly. I'm going to go the opposite side and say quite often, but they die.
I don't think anyone has successfully escaped.
There's just too many slaves for there not to be repeated attempts and repeated uprisings and repeated issues. The slave masters, it's their job to try and stop that from occurring. Does it happen? Probably on a daily basis at different parts of the empire at different points. Sure. But is it successful? That's the more important question. And most of the time, no.
Yeah, my thing is like the Darklands are so inhospitable, no one gets out. I don't think anybody gets out. Maybe
I imagine, there'll be one or two here or there that gets out because you never say never. Plus, it makes for an interesting character background if you want to have someone who's been down the mines of
very rare. I'll just leave it at very rare.
Yeah, I think that's much better because you always want to have those cool stories and that stand out as examples that are different. What if, for example, a human who was stuck down there got blessed by Tal or blessed by Ronald? And just creeps their way out. There's almost no way that they would have stopping them. They'd have to then figure out how the hell he's going to survive the long walk across the plains. Honestly, but there's always going to be ways.
Getting away from the other slaves probably is not the hard part. It's once you're out of Zharr-Naggrund that it probably gets really fucking difficult.
Yeah. As I say, I think I don't think security needs to be that high because where are you going to go? The repercussions for escaping are so severe. You will be killed. That's it. You are going to die. Are you sure you want to do this? And then you go out and either they kill you or the environment kills you. And then they drag your body back and they hang it up for everyone else to see.
Yep. Late question. Well, no, it's not late. Why Zharr-Naggrund? Oh, okay. We've already talked about that quite a bit. How far does Hashut's influence reach? It's pretty much just the Darklands. And then where his fleets go.
And even then,
just those little spheres of influence.
It's spines and spheres and very little else. It's like a web. And all the rest of it's just open lands where mostly greenskins dominate.
Can you find Chaos Dwarfs outside the Darklands? Rarely.
Very rarely. I mean, other than as part of the Chaos Dwarf fleets, and even then, they don't make it round into the main ocean because they very rarely go past is it Dusk? I always forget which was which. The Fortress of Dusk, Fortress of Dawn, whichever one's at the bottom there. Whichever one's at the bottom of the Southlands. I always forget which one it is, but they very rarely go past that because the elves patrol like bastards. So they don't let the Chaos Dwarves by.
That's Dawn. Yeah,
Dawn. Thank you. And they have. They've had many naval conflicts, and the Chaos Dwarves have broadly lost because the elves are masters of the sea.
Yeah. For people that wonder, the High Elves actually fight the Chaos Dwarves a lot in naval skirmishes.
Yeah,
which is very annoying to the Chaos Dwarves. Akuma King, since bulls are sacred to Hashut the Chaos Dwarves, how do they view Minotaurs? Would Taurus the Brass Bull get any bonus from interacting with the Dwarfs? So what's interesting about this is I think the dwarfs would be moderately kind of like, oh, that's interesting. But the problem is actually the beastmen side of things. Beastmen despise civilization, like on a fundamental fiery level of hate, the likes of which is kind of insane. I don't think they'd get along.
Yeah, my biggest issue is that the Chaos Dwarves never really had anything to do with Minotaurs. Why the fuck not, given everything else they did? There should have been something laid into there somewhere. At least a mention, a box, a something written in one of the books discussing the fact that their god is so fundamentally tied to what appears to be Minotaurs, even if they hated them because they were a debased form of life in comparison to what they see as divinity. There should be some sort of comment as to what the relationship is.
Yeah, a really good
feels like it's missing.
A really good old world character from like a role play thing, just as like a random potential adventure hook character, would be a Chaos Dwarf Demon Smith who is like come to study Minotaurs or is hunting Taurus. Like he's heard about Taurus and he's come hunting for him because he wants to study him or take him back to Zharr-Naggrund.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely something missing there. It'd be lovely to have. I mean, they're not. It's not like it's not going to be known. They've probably got slaves that include Minotaurs, not necessarily many, but they'll have some. So seriously, get that little block filled up, GW, somewhere. Roleplay book, something.
Yeah, there is not an explicit relationship between them, which is weird because you would expect it.
It's weird. Yeah. Totally.
Let's see. Would it be a fair assumption that the Beastmen would hate the Chaos Dwarves because of the way the Chaos Dwarves oppress the wilds and destroy everything? Yes. The Beastmen are very particular about how they want the world to work, and the Chaos Dwarves do not fit within that worldview. They would not get along. But I mean, the Beastmen are very jealous, spiteful little turds. They don't like anybody. They don't even like the other Chaos factions. They don't like anybody.
Yeah, they're a pretty complicated group. There's a relatively big conversation going on over in the LAWhammer Discord, actually, about using Beastmen in a slightly different way, which I think is worth all centered around Tal, the god of the wild.
Yeah, but yeah, the Chaos Dwarfs would be very not kosher with the Beastmen under any circumstances.
Nah,
it doesn't even matter which version of the Beastmen, they would not get along.
Totally.
Because the Beastmen are kind of the concept of like the wilds overtaking everything else, whereas the Chaos Dwarfs are taking all of reality and crushing it under your will and industry.
Yeah, one is what industry and the other one is almost the opposite. Yeah, totally.
Let's see. Who knows more about enslaving? Oh, this is actually a cool question. Who knows more about enslaving demons? The sorcerer prophets of Hashut or Morathi? Morathi is much older. She is much older.
Yeah, I would say the Chaos Dwarfs. Upon balance, they are mastering new forms of demonic binding that the Dark Elves have never truly pursued with anything close.
A subject we should do a stream sometime exploring why the elves do not go deep into a lot of the subject matter that they do. Like when it comes to like binding demons or necromancy or a lot of these other things, the elves are very weird about not taking things as far as a lot of the other races do, which is interesting. It's a consistent theme.
They have boundaries that they very rarely cross, and those boundaries are definitely worth another stream because I'll just start talking. I was like, they are. Oh,
we're already over time. We don't have time. Okay, totally. So just zipping through these. Let's see. If the war machine sold by Zharr-Naggrund to the Warriors of Chaos are experimental, unreliable, does that apply to everything that they sell to their allies? Everything they sell to their allies is usually stuff that they just don't want or they consider like Now, sometimes it's unreliable things that are like, what if somebody wields this? Let's give it to that guy and see what it does. But when that happens, they usually send a Chaos Dwarf with them to like observe it and report back. So it's pretty rare that it's like a weapon or something like that.
And it's theirs. And particularly if it's a demon infested artifact that requires tending, they'll be hanging along with that. The answer to that is we don't actually have an answer. We have to make one up.
With the Hell Cannons, they send escorts to observe. Whereas like they don't do that with anything else that we've seen. So
yeah, quite. So we've got snippets only, so make your own decision on that one, really.
Some brief questions. If the Chaos Dwarfs reclaimed a stronghold, would there wait, what? If the regular dwarfs, if the regular dwarfs reclaimed Uzkalak, do you think there'd be any lost artifacts around the place of interest to them, or do you think Chaos would have consumed everything and they'd be like, no, blow it up?
Yes. I think both.
Yeah, no, man, the dwarves reclaiming Uzkalak would be a fascinating storyline.
That'd be a fun story. That's the sort of shit
they'd have to confront some really uncomfortable shit in Uzkalak.
Yep, it's a good story.
Yeah, hell, that'd make a Gotrek and Felix going to Uzkalak would have been a great book. I would have read the shit out of that.
That would be fucking awesome.
Let's see. How big of a threat to the Chaos Dwarfs are the normal dwarfs? Do the Darvazar want to claim the dwarf holds, or is that not profitable for them?
It's not on their remit.
They deeply despise one another, but I think they also both understand it's not worth the amount of effort it would take to wipe each other out.
Yeah,
because like
if anything, they shun each other.
Yeah,
if anything, they shun each other. I think the only place where you're likely to see them meeting more frequently would be over in the mountains of Morn with whatever is over there in the dwarfy side. I imagine there's a certain amount of hatred between those lot.
Yeah, the hatred that they have for each other is greater than anything else, which for a dwarf is saying a lot. But
it's so high they don't even want to think about it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They really don't like talking about one another. Like that's something that writers have actually been nicely consistent on, is that whenever you have a dwarf and Chaos Dwarfs are brought up, they shut that shit down. They will use violence if they have to shut that shit down.
Yeah, what I particularly like about the whole potential situation is that there might be no grudges.
there's no written grudges. It's just a personal intrinsic.
If anything, it's shame. It's all shame over what occurred. And it's not grudges, it's shame. And they feel deep, abiding shame.
Yeah, there's I actually really enjoyed David Geimer's Road of Skulls for Gotrek and Felix, because he does a really good job representing how like unpleasant the two of them fighting each other is. Like the Dawizar find some joy in it, of like showing how great they've become and they don't need the ancestor gods to like crack the holds of their lesser kin. But for the dwarves, it's a deeply uncomfortable conflict. Like just fighting the Chaos Dwarfs is very uncomfortable for them.
Yeah.
Like Gotrek is very, he has a really well written little series of dialogue with Felix about it, because Felix is like, y'all okay? And they're like, we really don't want to talk about it. This is very uncomfortable for us. Let's see. Have the Chaos Dwarfs been affected during the Goblin Wars? Not really. The Goblin Wars was mostly contained to the mountains themselves, but maybe they had some issues. But
I think it's more likely that they affected the end of the Goblin Wars in a way that nobody would like to.
Yeah, you could argue that yes, they had a horrible time with the Goblin Wars, but it was very self-inflicted because that is when the Black Orcs rebellion happened.
And arguably the Black Orcs then turned the Goblin Wars into something else.
Yeah, so
there's the tail end.
Yeah, a lot. The big epic finale of the Goblin Wars is quite literally the Chaos Dwarfs' fault.
Yep.
Would normal dwarves attacking Zharr-Naggrund shoot the sorcerer statues at them as ammunition with their grudge throwers? I would hope so. Hilarious.
Crack.
Dwarf doom divers. Okay, last few. Does Zharr-Naggrund have good public transportation? Probably better than you would think.
I think it's probably got very good public transportation
systems that allow you to go up and down the
piers. Elevators. It's going to have lifts.
And they're big into steam tech. They love their steam tech.
Yeah. There's going to be steam everything. There's going to be little platforms you can stand on to carry you off somewhere, in the same way that they've got the various forges.
Chaos Dwarf trains always run on time.
And I was about to say, and trains.
Yeah,
so many freaking trains. Yeah, definitely.
Let's see. Is Astrogoth at the top of the leadership right now? Yes. Astrogoth is the big guy in charge, though he has been exiling people who are beginning to threaten his rule. Most notably, Drazoth the Ashen, who was his apprentice, and he exiled him because he was getting too strong. So he chased him out to the Black Fortress. Let's see. Is Zharr-Naggrund considered sacrosanct to the Chaos Dwarfs? Or does conflict between sorcerers prophets regularly spill into the street? Interestingly, sorcerer prophets is very considered not good.
Yeah, they're
dwarves. Kill each other.
They're dwarves.
Yeah, like kinslaying can happen, but it's usually a form of punishment, not something that happens casually.
Yeah, they're dwarves. So this is much rarer than it would be amongst many of the species that we generally determine as evil. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. They have many conflicts because they are tyrants at heart. They want control, which means that there's going to be sometimes deep and abiding conflict. But you tend to find that these are simmering things that last scores, if not centuries. Scores of years, pardon me, if not centuries. But yeah, they're dwarves.
Yeah, if a sorcerer prophet is going to assassinate another sorcerer prophet, it'd have to be very sneaky, because other sorcerer prophets would use that against them, and it would be bad. So you have the whole thing. Can Andy and you wish my girlfriend Anna happy birthday? Yes, happy birthday, and I hope you're having a great day.
Happy birthday! Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday to you! Was it Anna?
Anna.
Anna. There you go. Happy birthday, dear Anna. Happy birthday to you. There you go.
Let's see. If the Black Orcs were a success, would the Chaos Dwarfs try their luck with another race? I think, well, you could argue that's what the Kadaa are. They're the concept of the Black Orcs and them realizing that they can't necessarily account for all the variables of already living life. So let's just make something from scratch.
I think you could also happily say that there are many more examples of things that they have done. It's just we don't see them. For example, who's to say that half the Hobgoblins aren't genetically modified?
Yep. Also,
so
if you want to have
backstab them.
With a Wolfrip villain, introducing a Wolfrip villain who comes to the Empire and has like new genetically altered somethings could be super duper fucking fun. Like what if he shows up with genetically modified ogres or chaos spawn or whatever? It could actually be really spicy. Or what if a Chaos Dwarf is trying to capture your elf character because he wants to experiment with elves? Ooh. Because they don't get a lot of those over there. Let's see. And then the last three questions. Do does anyone visit Zharr-Naggrund? He asked elves, but I'm going to change it to anyone. The answer is no. Nobody visits.
I would say that nobody visits, but you would definitely get some who would be looking to make trades. There's going to be various powerful greenskin tribes who will attempt to be doing this.
Yeah,
Chaos Warlords. Some Chaos Warlords will come down. It wouldn't surprise me if there's been a delegation or two from the Dark Elves as well.
Yeah, I imagine Malekith. I would be shocked, actually, if Malekith has not made contact with Zharr-Naggrund.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very likely outcome, particularly if, for example, there's an incursion coming. He very well may attempt to stop them selling things to anyone that might interfere with any of the Dark Elves plans. The Dark Elves have worked with Chaos, for goodness sake. They have contempt for Chaos, and they're happy to use them, which means they'll be happy to use Chaos Dwarves as well. So, yeah, I think it's definitely.
Man, you want to talk about some cutthroat diplomacy? I bet those talks were brutal.
Yep.
And then the last few questions: who knows more about the Chaos Dwarfs, the Skaven, or the Dwarfs? I would say Skaven encountered them far more often.
It's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, because the Skaven are like constantly trying to steal shit from them too. Yeah, they know a lot about the Chaos Dwarfs. The Dwarfs, know very little.
Travis, yes. Would you say that the Chaos Dwarfs and the Dwarfs would be involved in each other's end times in a more satisfying end of the world? Yes. Giving the Chaos Dwarves a raison d'etre, what they're doing, having the Dwarves be horrified in one fashion or another, or worse, look at what they're doing, and perhaps even some of them saying, "Oh shit, they're doing something that's almost worthwhile," but they're, oh my goodness. In the end, you want to make everything difficult in the end times, and I think that the Chaos Dwarves should have been a part of the dwarf story.
Yeah, there was a lot of letdowns, but not having kind of like a final kind of showdown in a sense of the children of the ancestor gods, and then these children that believed themselves abandoned, trying to reveal a truth of what happened there, who or what Hashut is, and how he ties back to the ancestor gods. That should have happened.
What replaced the ancestor gods for the Chaos Dwarves, and what sort of questions does that pose to the other dwarves? That's a question that should have been asked and answered during the course of the end times. It wouldn't have taken much. You could have even just dropped a double-page spread in one of the books, and it could have done the hard work there. It would have been fun.
Yeah, especially because there would have been some really interesting questions for like a council of everyone fighting Archaon, of Chaos Dwarf saying, "We're willing to do anything to win," whereas your dwarf friends here, they won't. Like, they have these rules they got to follow, and the dwarf saying, "No, we're the good guys," and the Chaos Dwarf saying, "You'll just accept your fate and die. We won't." That could be a really fascinating argument between those factions.
So, tinfoil hat time. There's a forgotten ancestor god and a source of shame under Uzkalak. And you know what? Yeah, possibly. As an alternative to us suggesting that in the end times, that Hashut is an ancestor god, it could be that an ancestor god fell to Hashut and is trapped underneath there. That god is the reason that they all went, because that god persuaded them to. There's lots of different stories you could tell there that would be super fun. So I don't think that's necessarily that tinfoil hatty. It seems relatively possible as an outcome. So yeah, that's quite fun. And we also have one there from Sepifer. What relationship or interactions do we see between the various undead and the Chaos Dwarves?
So for one, there is an explicit mention of there is an ogre by the name of Braug the Slave Lord, who is a very
remembered.
Yeah, he's a very weird character, but he is an ogre that got captured by a necromancer to be experimented on, and then through literal shenanigans, he ate the necromancer who was mid-spell, and because of that, his stomach ended up turning into kind of like a vacuum for dark magic of a necromantic sort. So he exudes necromantic energy from his belly, and he walks around killing people, and he gets these big trains of corpses, zombies and skeletons that follow him around, and he marches them to Zharr-Naggrund, and he trades these undead slaves for goodies. And he's a very staunch ally of the Chaos Dwarfs. Hilarious character. Very weird, but hilarious. What's interesting though is that the Chaos Dwarfs, being as material as they are, I think they would actually have some very interesting mutual ideas with the vampire counts, and debatably even the Tomb Kings. Now, granted, the undead have a very hilarious level of arrogance to them that is often viewed as a madness that causes them to really struggle to make friendships. Especially like the Tomb Kings and especially like the big bad vampire lords. That being said, I would be shocked if there is not like a necrarch that has established a relationship with the Chaos Dwarfs at some point.
Yeah, I mean, bluntly, the Chaos Dwarves make the best magical artifacts in the world because they're willing to go further than the dwarves.
Yeah, honestly,
and they're willing to pull in shit, which means that anyone out there who has got a low moral standing in terms of willingness to use chaos created artifacts are going to go, hell yes. And there are more than one undead individual out there who would be more than willing to deal with them. It's just the connection. They are so far away. So you need the wanderers, your Manfred van Karsteins, rather than your average life master or whatever.
Yeah, I would say Manfred undoubtedly, in my opinion, has visited them during his world travels. Vlad probably stopped by there at some point. Neferata has to have spies. There's no way Neferata and the Lamians would not have spies.
Exactly, because they're on the other side, over at the pinnacle. So yeah, totally. Hey, Godzilla. This is going to get me through. Oh, you go for it.
This is going to get me thrown to the snake pit, but the stream and Total War has me love the Chaos Dwarfs rival my love for the Lizardmen. I mean, they're pretty cool. It's whatever. It's fine.
One of the reasons
I love all my children equally. Okay.
Yeah, me too. But one of the reasons I've always sort of loved the Chaos Dwarves, I indeed even sent one of my campaigns over there for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. There's a Swordmaster of Hoth in that campaign randomly. But one of the reasons I've always loved it is because they've got so little love out there from Games Workshop as a whole. So it's always been one of those weird factions that sit at the sides, a little bit like, say, the Gene Stealers for 40k as a faction, the Gene Stealer cult. They're not given as much love as all the Space Marines. They're not given as much love as the Dwarves. So I've always had a relatively soft spot for them and felt that they've always needed just that little bit more push to give their lore a bit more oomph, to really make them sing. It's one of the reasons I really loved the Tamarkan book, because it brought a whole bunch of extra stuff. It was just a shame it's tried to rewrite everything that came before, where when we've got the newest version of Total War, they've very much taken everything, and it's almost like a fanboy creation, where they've taken all the best bits, thrown it together and gone, take a look at that. That's fucking
we love fanboy creations here.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's pretty much our I don't know, it's our grist, it's what we do.
It's almost like the point is that, or who knows. But anyway, we're way over time. So
we are way over time. But that was fun.
Yeah, thank you all very much for watching. Like always, I came into this being like, I don't know how we're going to talk about this for even 2
we
hours.
ended up half an hour longer than normal.
Yeah, and I actually came to some really, really cool little nuggets that I'm really excited to walk away with and think about. Because like before the stream, I would have been on team, hard on team Hashut's like a weird, different kind of entity that slipped in during the Cataclysm. And now I am much more hard. No, he is a Demon Prince Ancestor God. Like I am full in on that team now.
I was not in on that before this stream either, so I really do like where that lands. Can I also just throw out just a general big thanks to everyone who's voted each time that we decide which topics we'll do for next time, because you've led us in some unexpected directions and at the same time left us with some really good streams because of that. This is not a stream I expected to do, but it is a stream that I'm absolutely delighted that I have done, even if I did mistake my stupid Black Orc Uprising early on.
It's okay.
I am gonna.
It's okay.
I'm gonna cry over that for weeks now. It's like such a rookie error. Bloody hell.
Oh man, but yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you all very, very much for joining us. Thank you for all the super generous super chats and all that.
Yeah, that was super nice. Thank you so much.
We appreciate y'all helping us keep food on the table.
Indeed. And for next week, it'll be a vote on my channel, won't be? And you'll be over on your channel. So
it probably will be on a different day.
Because next week I'm going up to see my parents because they've been married for 50 years, which is lovely. So we're going to pop up the date for the day afterwards. It's pretty cool.
I feel like my parents have been married forever and they've only been married for like 36 years.
14 years and you fuck, I feel old. Right, so that being the case, let's end on Andy feels old. Yay! Right. Other than that, we'll see you all next time. Goodbye.